Chapter 1004. The man clenched the empty bottle in his hand so tightly that it almost broke in his palm. At this moment, his cell phone rang and Li Nanheng picked it up. "Boss, didn't you find Feng Ling when you returned to the base? After talking to you on the phone, we finally came out, but we couldn't find Feng Ling. With her condition today, she can't walk that far. It's at least 20 kilometers from the base to a place where she can get a taxi. She has a high fever and it's snowing so heavily. It's impossible for her to walk out. Boss, when you returned to the base earlier, you didn't find Feng Ling either, right?" Li Nanheng took the bottle into the window, looked at the mess on the ground, and said coldly, "Keep looking. Contact the Los Angeles Transportation Bureau and get the surveillance videos along the way and all the roads leading to the city." "Okay." With boss's words, Kay was relieved. After hanging up the phone, he hurriedly went to contact someone. Li Nanheng put down his cell phone and walked into the bathroom, only to see that the bottles inside had been broken. Everything was either thrown away, dirted, or smashed. Nothing was left. Just like the little Feng Ling he had been carefully holding in his hand, she was suddenly thrown into hell from a high place within one day. He didn't even come back to save her in time. From dark to dawn, Li Nanheng walked out of the room and saw his grandfather, Li Junyan, who had been standing in the corridor with a walking stick. Looking at the blue stubble around Li Nanheng's chin and the fact that he had been sitting in the room all night, Li Junyan was furious. When he walked over expressionlessly, he raised his cane and hit him hard on the back. "Didn't I ask you to guard the cenotaph of second Miss Feng in the ancestral hall? Who allowed you to come out? You heartless, unjust, and unfilial thing, you really don't take my words seriously for a woman, do you?" Li Nanheng didn't seem to feel any pain. Although he was hit on the back, his expression didn't change, and he didn't even frown. He just glanced at him coldly. "If it weren't for the accident in the base, do you think I wouldn't have stayed in the ancestral hall for 3 days? Even if I'm heartless and unfilial, I've never denied what I promised, including the cenotaph that I promised to marry second Miss Feng. Even if I was unwilling, I still married her. If it weren't for the changes in the base, would still be in the ancestral hall, not here. How dare you King argue with me? You know that Feng Ling is a woman, but you keep the secret and don't tell anyone. This is heartless. You don't respect a base member who has been by your side for many years and even like her. This is unjust. You know that the Li family has always hated women, and you know that I can't let you marry someone like Feng Ling, but you hide such a woman in the base and hold her in the palm of your hand every day. This is unfilial. I didn't directly blame you, but I just drove that woman out, but you left the little wife in the ancestral hall and came to find Feng Ling. Do you think I will give you a chance to see her again? I tell you, Nanheng, don't even think about it in this life. Feng Ling can't marry our Li family, even after 3 years. You'd better give up as soon as possible. And let me tell you, I plan to give full control of 11 base to Ah Feng. You'd better go back and take over the Li family. No matter how smart Li Jins and Li Lin are, they are still not half as smart as you. You still put all your attention on the base, but you still made the Li family rise steadily. If you can focus on the Li family business, then the Li family, I won't go back. Give up." Li Nanheng's face was cold as he threw down the words and left. Mr. Li's face instantly turned livid, and he suddenly turned his eyes to Li Nanheng's cold back. Although Li Nanheng usually didn't completely listen to the arrangements of the elders at home, at least he was just a little unruly and a little naughty, and would never refuse in such a ruthless tone. She was just a tomboy who was not even 18 years old. Why did he care so much about her? Mr. Li angrily hit his crutch hard on the ground. "Nanheng, stop." However, the man who had gone far had no intention of stopping. "Li Nanheng, are you going to sever ties with our Li family because of that tomboy named Feng Ling?" Li Nanheng's footsteps slowed down a little, and then he stopped, and then in less than 2 seconds, without any response, he walked out. Mr. Li was so angry that his hand holding the crutch was trembling. This bastard. It was just dawn, and Kay and the others had already rushed back. Seeing Boss Lee driving out, they hurriedly stopped the car, rolled down the window, and said, "Boss, only the road in the suburbs has surveillance cameras, and there are no surveillance cameras on other roads. We checked all the surveillance cameras all night, but there is no trace of Fong Ling. Have you checked other roads? It's very dark. I drove around but didn't find her." Kay frowned. Li Nanheng didn't speak anymore, stepped hard on the accelerator, and drove the black Hummer out of the base. Outside the base, Li Nanheng dialed Fong Ling's cell phone number in the car and drove the car to all the roads she could pass. The car drove to the left side of the community leading to the urban area, but there was no trace of Fong Ling. Her number had been dialed countless times, but her phone was always turned off. Where else could she go except to the urban area to find a place to settle down for the time being? There was not even a jungle nearby. She had lived outside for so many years. Even if she grew up in the jungle, it was impossible for her to go back to the jungle. It was impossible for her to adapt to that kind of life. Li Nanheng turned the car around and drove to the urban area with a gloomy face. The Li family. Qin Xiu and Mrs. Li got out of the car in front of the Li family, and Qin Xiu said unhappily when she got out of the car behind them, "Since you've already married my sister's cenotaph, what are you thinking about? This is only the third day of the nominal marriage, and you want to come and see it? It's just the clothes of 2 babies. At most, they will be placed in the ancestral hall. What else can you do? Do you have to be so worried?" Qin Xiu didn't speak but just glanced at Mrs. Li. Mrs. Li also didn't speak. A few days ago, she found that the round jade bracelet she had been carrying with her all year round was missing, and she was upset for a long time. After Li Nanheng married Li Nanheng, she felt even more uneasy, so she just wanted to come and see it. Li Jins happened to come out at this time. Seeing them, she came up and said politely, "Mrs. Fong, Mrs. Li, Miss Fong, are you here to see Mr. Li? Is Nanheng here?" Qin Xiu asked. "He should have gone to the base." Mrs. Li frowned. "He went to the base as soon as he got married? Didn't he say that he would stay in the ancestral hall for a few days?" Fong Mingzhu sneered. "I guess he suddenly found that the person named Fong Ling in their base is actually a woman. The news that a woman has been disguised as a man in the base for too long has caused a sensation, so he must go back to deal with it." Li Jins didn't know much about the situation, but was surprised to hear this. Mrs. Li and Qin Xiu's expressions instantly trembled. The two of them suddenly turned to look at Fong Mingzhu. Fong Ling was a woman? Chapter 1005. "Mingzhu, what did you just say? That young man named Fong Ling is a woman?" Qin Xiu looked at her in surprise. Fong Mingzhu could understand her mother's surprise, but she didn't understand why her mother looked so surprised. She just glanced at her mother. "She's a woman. I don't know why she disguised as a man to sneak into 11 base. I guess she's born to like places with more men." Qin Xiu's eyes trembled, and Fong Ling's face, which was exactly the same as hers when she was young, flashed in her mind, and then she turned to look at her mother. Madame Dowager pressed her hand on Qin Xiu's arm. After a long silence, she said, "Let's go to the ancestral hall and have a look." Everything could only be guessed, and the age didn't seem to match. What if her hope was dashed again? In the few years after second brother fell into the sea, the Fong family went to many orphanages. Anyone who looked like second brother was thought to be a miracle. They thought it was that poor child, but time and time again, they all failed. Second brother had been gone for 17 years. If Fong Ling, who claimed to be 17 years old, was really second brother, she should be 18 years old. If the age didn't match, no matter how many coincidences there were, it was useless. But that child really looked like second brother. If she was a girl, it would be even better. Madame Dowager and Qin Xiu knew each other well. There were many things that couldn't be said before they were confirmed. "Madame Dowager, Mrs. Fong, they are not here today. Let's go to the ancestral hall in a few days. The ceremony has just been held." It's too early for you to come. Li Jins didn't know what happened, so it was not convenient for the Feng family to go in at this time. In particular, Miss Feng Mingzhu seemed to be unhappy about something. Listening to their words, there should be some strange dispute. Of course, the Li family would never get involved in these disputes, so the best way was to stay away from them and not let them get close. We're just going to take a look at second brother's cenotaph, the old madam said softly. Madam, the clothes second miss left behind are not just these 2 years. You've only brought 2 of them here and kept the rest with you. It's only been 2 years and you've only left for 2 or 3 days. Do you really have to enter the Li family's ancestral hall? Madam, after all, you're from the same generation as the Li family's grandfathers. You should know that people who are not members of the Li family are not allowed to enter the ancestral hall. Besides, the Li family's patriarchal ideology has always been very serious. Even I, the granddaughter of 3rd Master Li, have to repeatedly request and perform a ceremony to enter the ancestral hall. You, Mrs. Feng, and Miss Feng, this is not appropriate. Madame Dowager frowned but didn't insist on walking inside. Forget it. Since the Li family has so many rules, I won't break them. When will Nanheng come back? I'm not sure. If you guys are too anxious, I'll give him a call now. But when I called him just now, he didn't answer. Then don't bother looking for him. Now that he has returned to the base, there must be something important. Madame Dowager skipped the topic about Feng Ling in the base, winked at Qin Xiu, and turned back to the car. Feng Mingzhu turned to look at the front door of the Li family's villa. She thought that she should have married into this place openly, but in the end, she still missed everything she wanted. She lowered her eyes, didn't say anything more, and got into the car. Seeing that the Feng family's car had left, Li Jin slowly breathed out. Really, they all suddenly left in one day, leaving her to clean up the mess at home. All the roads in the suburbs of Los Angeles were seriously frozen. Even the best driver couldn't completely control the stability of the car on such an uncontrolled icy road. The tires of the black Hummer were very stable, but they still skidded on the ice countless times. The car drove very fast, and on the road to the city, the car drifted because of the speed. Seeing that the car was out of control, Li Nanheng looked at the empty road ahead and the surrounding deserted fields, and his hands left the steering wheel. In the end, with a bang, the tall black Hummer hit the roadside fence, broke through the fence, and stopped hard in the barren field, and then the engine went out with a puff. Li Nanheng's chest was hit hard by the steering wheel, but he didn't even frown. When the car stopped, he sat silently in the driver's seat, looking at everything outside. His eyes were empty, and he slowly raised his hand hanging on his thigh, only to catch a mass of air. Last night, he sat in Feng Ling's room all night. He wanted to feel her temperature but couldn't. Only then did he realize that she hadn't left anything behind for so long. Once she disappeared, even if he had the ability, he might not be able to find her. Qingla Villa. After 2 days of rest, Feng Ling just caught a cold, had a fever, and had a hangover. After the fever subsided, she was fine and could get out of bed and walk around. Wen Liqing did give her a good rest space. Except for checking her body and eating time, she let her rest alone in the room most of the time. Feng Ling felt much better today. She went to take a simple shower, put on a set of light-colored sportswear given to her by Wen Liqing, and went to open her 2 suitcases. Most of the things in the suitcases could no longer be used or worn. After all, she walked outside in the sleet, and even the best suitcases had been soaked in water. Because the people here were very polite and wouldn't casually rummage through her things, the things in the suitcases were soaked in water for more than 2 days and could no longer be used. She packed up the things inside and prepared to throw them away, and noticed that her cell phone had been placed in this ball of clothes for a long time. Li Nanheng accompanied her to buy this cell phone, and it had been used for a long time. Once, he offered to help her change it again, but she refused. At that time, she inexplicably liked the things he chose for her. She didn't know what kind of emotion it was. She liked it, was reluctant to throw it away, and wanted to keep using it. Today, she finally understood what kind of emotion it was. So, there was no need to keep this cell phone. The girl squatting by the suitcases did not hesitate to throw the cell phone into the trash can, including all the other things that could no longer be worn or used, and threw them out. Chapter 1006. At the bottom of the other suitcase, there was something. Fong Ling was about to put the suitcase away when she suddenly remembered the thing there. She pulled open the curtain at the bottom and took out the jade pendant that had been placed inside. She had been wearing this jade pendant since she was a child. She could throw other things away, but not this one. She sat on the ground for a while and thought of the jade bracelet she picked up at the banquet last time, but she didn't have time to pay much attention to it after returning to the base. It seemed that she had stuffed it into the suitcase after coming back. Which suitcase? At that time, outside the base hall, all the things that fell on the ground were picked up, and nothing was left, so it couldn't be lost. She reached out to the trash can and took out all the clothes that had been thrown away. She looked through them one by one until the round jade bracelet fell out of the pocket of one of the clothes. Fong Ling held the jade pendant in one hand and the jade bracelet in the other. She looked at them for a while, then overlapped the two things in front of her eyes, and finally stuck them together. She pressed her fingers gently. The jade pendant and the jade bracelet fit perfectly in the middle of the jade bracelet as if they were one. Looking at the two things that suddenly merged into one in her hands, Fong Ling, who was squatting by the trash can, suddenly sat on the ground. At this time, the old lady's excited expression every time she looked at her, and Mrs. Fong, Qin Xiu, occasionally fell into a trance when she looked at her. She didn't know much about the Fong family. She always thought that the Fong family only had one daughter, Fong Mingzhu, but she seemed to forget when it was. From the conversation between the mother and daughter, it seemed that Qin Xiu had been thinking about another daughter who had died. Thinking of this, her mind suddenly became clear. At that time, the old lady in Qin Xiu stared at her face, asked her if she was a man or a woman, and asked her age. After hearing that she was a man, the two of them were disappointed, and when they heard her age, they were even more disappointed. But her gender was fake, and she was not sure about her age. Could she be the daughter that the Fong family thought was dead? But no matter whether she was or not, the only living member of the Fong family was Fong Mingzhu. She was the eldest daughter of the Fong family. Li Nanheng would only marry Fong Mingzhu. What did this have to do with her own identity? If she could be the daughter of the Fong family just because of this pair of jade pendants, did it mean that when she saw Li Nanheng again, she would have to call him brother-in-law? Heh! How ridiculous! Fong Ling indifferently put the jade pendant in her hand back into the suitcase. Facing the possibility that her identity was about to be revealed, and the so-called dead daughter they mentioned, it meant that she was not abandoned, but something must have happened. However, she realized that at this moment, she actually didn't want to pursue the truth of her origins, and she didn't want to find her parents or her family. So what if she is? Moreover, Fong Mingzhu had always hated her. If she really appeared with the jade pendant, it would not be just one family that would be unhappy. A child raised by a wolf would never be welcomed anywhere. There was no trace of Fong Ling. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. It was indeed difficult to find a person who had never contacted anyone outside. After she left, she didn't turn on her cell phone again, couldn't find the location of GS, and didn't use the money in her bank card. No one knew where she had appeared. Kay even contacted Xiao Fei and asked if he knew where Fong Ling had been recently, because Fong Ling didn't know anyone outside. But obviously, the result was the same. No one knew where she was. Li Nanheng's car was found in the wilderness that day, and then he sat in the car for a day and a night. The next day, the members of the base who came out to look for him found that Boss Li was unconscious in the car and rushed him to the hospital. Only then did they know that Li Nanheng hadn't eaten much since the day Li Nanheng got married. In the 2 days in the ancestral hall, he didn't eat anything. Because of Fong Ling's matter, he drove day and night without sleep, and the impact force when the car suddenly stopped in the wilderness and the air conditioning in the car was not turned on all night, so Li Nanheng was unconscious in the car for a long time. Logically speaking, Xiao Fei had already left the base and could no longer have any contact with the base, but he still drove back to the base because of Feng Ling's matter. He wanted to settle the score with Li Nanheng, but when he found Li Nanheng, he was still unconscious in the hospital, so he couldn't punch him. He just threw the English newspaper with the Feng and Li family's wedding on his bed and turned to leave with a cold face. Only Wen Liqing knew that Feng Ling had left. But she promised Feng Ling that she wouldn't say anything. If Li Nanheng was not married, maybe she would be the peacemaker and help him secretly pass the message. But the fact was just as Feng Ling left before she left. Li Nanheng was married. From the perspective of reason and emotion, there was no reason to disturb his life, and he was not qualified to disturb her future life. They were strangers in the future, and there was no need to meet again. When Feng Ling left, she left her card with more than $300,000 in deposit with Wen Liqing and then took 50,000 yuan in cash from Wen Liqing's hand. This way, she didn't want them to find out where she had withdrawn the money. And her expenses were not big. This money was enough for her to live a good life, find a stable job, and stay away from everything in Los Angeles. Wen Liqing certainly wouldn't touch the card Feng Ling left, even if Feng Ling said she could use the money in it at any time. But Wen Liqing was not short of money. She could feel Feng Ling's sincerity, so she liked Feng Ling very much. She liked Feng Ling's sincerity when her feelings were strong and her decisiveness when her feelings were fading away. She couldn't see people she shouldn't see, and she couldn't think about people she shouldn't think about. If she could understand this matter one day earlier, there wouldn't be those disputes and stories between her and her brother, and she wouldn't be so persistent. Feng Ling said that she especially envied a beautiful and gentle female doctor like her, who had a good family background, an excellent educational background, a good upbringing, and was gentle and kind to others. In fact, what Feng Ling didn't know was that people like Wen Liqing envied her decisiveness and freedom. In life, people who seemed to have everything on the surface, but what they had would become a burden that couldn't be abandoned in the future. No one's hope could be let down. But Feng Ling was different. The only thing she had to do was not to let herself down. Chapter 1007. 2 years later. In the Chinese Martial Arts Hall on the first floor opposite the Polytechnic University in Boston, USA. Big news. Look. Look. This year's National Close Combat Women's Champion is a contestant named Zero. She wears a fighting cap all the time, so we can't see her face. But look at her figure. She is obviously our cold-faced female coach. Let me see. Oh my God, isn't our coach called Ling? Isn't she the codename Zero? Is there even a need to look at the name? Look at the devilish figure in the tight-fitting black combat suit, and then think about the cold-faced beauty who is obviously beautiful but always keeps a straight face. They are completely the same person, right? My God, our coach is the National Close Combat Champion in the United States. It's the women's team. What's wrong with the women's team? You haven't seen the video of the competition. The men's team is not as energetic as the women's team. Besides, with Coach Ling's skills and coldness, she can beat 10 men in front of her. She doesn't care about men or women, as long as she is our coach. Several trainees were sitting in the classroom and discussing. Suddenly, they heard a cold female voice. It's 3:00. If you don't, get out and make room for the next group of trainees. As soon as the trainees heard the voice, they all looked embarrassed and shivered. Sure enough, it was the champion with the mask in the magazine just now. They immediately found their respective positions with smiles on their faces, and then did the basic training movements in the class. While doing it, they glanced at the expressionless short-haired woman in front of the door from time to time. Tut, Coach Ling usually wore very loose and normal clothes, but several times when she appeared in some competition parties with other coaches, she wore a particularly cold black fighting suit, which was mostly tight. No matter how cold the clothes were, Coach Ling looked cold and sexy when she wore them. After all, no one had noticed it before. They didn't expect that she had such a good figure. She was really memorable at first sight. This time, they didn't expect that she actually participated in the national close combat competition at the suggestion of the head coach, and even won the championship. However, she kept a low profile and didn't mention anything. She usually didn't show her real name to others. When she participated in the competition, she even omitted it. She just used a code, 0. That was not the main point. The main point was that the female coach they had always admired and worshipped was said to be under 20 years old. She was really too young. These students were all a few years older than her. Most of them had good grades or came from rich families, so they came to the American Institute of Technology to study. On average, they were 2 or 3 years older than her. However, these male students were all suppressed by her indifferent temper. One word from Coach Ling was enough to make them not dare to say a word. Otherwise, she would really hit him. This Chinese martial arts club was not small, but none of the other coaches, male or female, no matter how old they were, could beat her in one-on-one combat. Fong Ling walked past the students and looked at their training postures. She raised one of their arms and patted him hard on the back. "What are you doing? Your back is hunched after not training for a few days. Straighten your back." "Yes." The male student mischievously dragged out his voice, but when he met the instructor's gaze, he instantly pursed his lips and didn't dare to make a sound. After looking at him coldly for a while, Fong Ling withdrew her gaze and turned to the other side of the students. Her current name was Ah Ling, also known as 0. 0 meant that she had nothing and started over again. After leaving 11 Base 2 years ago, she left Los Angeles. Originally, she wanted to go further and go to other countries, but she found that she had not experienced enough since she was a child. She was used to the United States and other places might not be suitable for her to survive. Later, she coincidentally came to Boston and entered this martial arts club as a coach. It took her half a year to adapt to life here and another year to accept such a peaceful life. Every day, she dealt with these international students in their early 20s. Most of them came from good families and were proud and arrogant. They just wanted to find something to learn, but they had too much money to spend, so they had to find some business to kill time. At first, they didn't pay much attention to their studies, but it didn't take long for them to change their temperament. They didn't dare to miss a martial arts class and didn't dare to make trouble during class. When she just walked to a student who had been learning with her for more than a year, the student suddenly turned his head to look at her and asked in a low voice, "Sister Ling, I heard that the champion this time will have a bonus of $500,000. Do you want to treat us to a meal?" Fong Ling paused and suddenly turned to look at him. The student immediately turned his head back in fright and continued to do the standard movements, otherwise he would definitely be beaten. However, he was kicked in the back of his knee. Wrong posture. The student. "What did you call me?" Fong Ling looked at him coldly. "Sister Ling." After being kicked again, the student immediately said with a sad face, "Coach Ling." Hearing the noise, the others all held back their laughter. Otherwise, if anyone really laughed out loud, they would definitely be the next one to suffer. Seeing that he was obedient, Fong Ling turned to look at the next person with a cold face. After checking their postures one by one and adjusting them, she walked back to the front, looked back at them for 5 minutes, and then said, "How are you doing with the breakdown movement and the whole process of the shoulder throw that I taught you last time? Who thinks you did well? Come and fight with me." The students looked at each other. This was the rhythm of Coach Ling taking the initiative to ask for abuse. The group of people rubbed their palms and were about to step forward, but the one standing in the front was the first to rush up. However, the faster he rushed up, the faster he lost face. He originally thought that he could directly carry such a thin woman on his shoulder and then throw her back to the ground, but all his movements were too loopy. Fong Ling just stretched out her hand casually, and the strength of the other party's hand disappeared. Instead, he overexerted himself and fell back to the ground. While everyone was holding back their laughter, Fong Ling clapped her hands and said calmly, "Next." Another one came up, and the result was the same. He wanted to throw the instructor down with brute force, but every time, he was the first to fall to the ground. The next one went up and fell even harder. The tall and slender woman clearly had a beautiful face, but her hair was cut short, and she wore such a neutral dress. She wore loose martial arts suit and sportswear every day. She was so thin, but she was so good at martial arts that so many men couldn't beat her. He really wondered where she came from. She was a beautiful and handsome woman. Just watching her fight was a sight to behold. Chapter 1008. Who else wants to fight? I think you're all very confident. Come and have a try. Fong Ling looked at the students who got up from the ground and turned to look at the others. This time, the group of people didn't dare to move. After hesitating for a long time, another student came out. Everyone looked at him. It was Chen Beiqing, who always took the opportunity to show his presence in front of the coach. It was said that his family ran a bank in Boston. He was definitely a rich man. He studied business management at Harvard and was about to graduate, but he had been chasing after Drill Master Ling for a whole year. However, this year, he was completely ignored by Drill Master Ling. She didn't give him any chance at all. She didn't even agree to treat him to a meal. TSK, is Beiqing asking for a beating? Since it didn't work to treat him to a date, did he want to be beaten until he was half disabled? Fong Ling looked at him calmly and coldly. Classmate Chen, are you sure? Chen Beiqing was 23 years old and studied at Harvard University, which was very close to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston. He had not graduated from his senior year, but had already received a master's degree in business management. He was a very fair and gentle boy, and he had a deeper relationship with Fong Ling than others. The reason was that when Fong Ling first came here to work, Chen Beiqing was kidnapped by a group of gangsters here because of an accident in his family's bank. Fong Ling passed by the parking lot outside Harvard at that time and noticed that those people were sneaking towards the white car. Based on her sensitivity to these gangsters, it was not difficult for her to see what they wanted to do. She recognized the license plate number of the white luxury car. It was the car of Chen Beiqing, who had just come to the martial arts club to learn some kung fu, so she was a little cautious. When those people were about to rob Chen Beiqing's car, she quickly drove past them, stopped the car next to Chen Beiqing's car, rolled down the window, and winked at Chen Beiqing, who hadn't noticed the danger. Chen Beiqing saw those people behind through the rearview mirror, immediately backed up with her, accelerated, knocked away those people walking behind the parking lot, and then drove away at a high speed. On the same day, they also launched an extreme car chase on a nearby road. Those gangsters were not so easy to get rid of. Although Chen Beiqing didn't have any kung fu skills, he was good at driving. Under the hint of Fong Ling's eyes, he hesitated at first because he couldn't leave her alone. Later, seeing that she seemed to be fine, he asked her to stop the car in the middle of the road to block those gangsters, and he drove away quickly. They were just a few gangsters, so it was impossible for them to catch up with Fong Ling. When the police and Chen Beiqing arrived, those gangsters had been lying on the ground with bruises all over their faces. They didn't even have time to take out the guns in their pockets before they were thrown aside by Fong Ling. It was just a case of kidnapping and revenge by a rich family. After understanding the situation, the police took the gangsters away. After Chen Beiqing communicated with the police, he looked back and saw that Fong Ling had turned to get into the car and was about to leave, but before she drove away, he suddenly opened the door of the passenger seat and sat in. Fong Ling looked at him strangely. "What's up? Why do you want to help me?" he asked. Fong Ling fastened her seatbelt and said calmly, "Didn't you just register at our martial arts club? I have some impression of you, so I helped you when I saw you. It's not a big deal. Are you going to help me or not? Do you know how difficult it is to deal with these people? I'm not familiar with you. If something happens and I don't admit it or take responsibility, what will you do?" Fong Ling sneered. "Little boy, you wouldn't care about this kind of thing if you didn't have full confidence. The dangerous people I've faced are much more ruthless than these gangsters. These people won't hurt me, and I don't need you to take responsibility for me. Get out of the car. I'm going back. Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows, looked at her, and suddenly smiled. Little boy? How old are you? Feng Ling, although she didn't know how old he was, most of the students who studied in Harvard were over 20 years old. In short, they were all older than her. Feng Ling was expressionless. 25. Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows. You don't look like me. Don't worry about it. Get out of the car. I still have something to do. You're out of danger. Go do what you need to do. Seeing that she was getting impatient, Chen Beiqing didn't say more. He just opened the door with a smile and said, I just want to go to the martial arts club to kill time. But now I have changed my mind. From today on, I will go to every class you teach. I will never be absent. Feng Ling ignored him. When he got out of the car, she closed the door and drove away. This matter was just a very small matter to her. She had experienced too many different kinds of fighting scenes. She just casually saved a student, so she didn't take it seriously. However, as he said, Chen Beiqing would definitely come to the 3 classes every week on time. In the first few months, he just came to class on time, but one day, he suddenly brought her a bouquet of roses every time he came to class. Feng Ling refused every time, so he simply asked someone to put the flowers on her desk and then came to class without saying a word. As time passed, Feng Ling was used to his stubbornness. Most importantly, he was stubborn under silence. He wouldn't pester her with words, nor would he do anything. It was just a bouquet of flowers. It was to tell everyone that he liked her and that he was pursuing her. However, he wouldn't say or do anything to annoy her, so she kept rejecting him. From the moment the flowers were sent to the table, to the door, and then directly into the trash can, he still delivered them without hesitation. After a long time, she was too lazy to pay attention to him. Anyway, it had nothing to do with her whether the flowers withered or not. Only the cleaning auntie who came to clean the office every day would say excitedly, "Oh, there are new flowers again? Our vases are almost full. The ones from last time are still fresh. It seems that we need to buy 2 more vases." Occasionally, he offered to treat her to dinner, but she didn't respond to him. She also didn't respond to him when he invited her to a movie. Feng Ling didn't take it seriously, and Chen Beiqing didn't say much. Besides, those were all things outside of class. In class, he was so obedient that she couldn't find fault with him. Her classmate Chen, are you sure? Didn't make Chen Beiqing's expression change too much. He just smiled and stretched out his hand to make a gesture of invitation. Chapter 1009. In an instant, there were whistles all around, and everyone was ready to watch the show. They just wanted to see how Chen Beiqing was beaten to the ground by Coach Ling. Feng Ling just glanced at him and took a step back to make room for him. Let's start. Chen Beiqing stepped forward. His movements were clean and neat, which was the standard posture of a good student. He stretched out his long arm and grabbed Feng Ling's arm. Just as Feng Ling was trying to find a loophole in his movements, he suddenly pulled her in front of him. Feng Ling instantly raised her eyes to look at him and was about to push him away when he moved his hand forward and suddenly clasped it on her left shoulder. When her expression suddenly changed, he abruptly lifted her onto his shoulder. Under everyone's shocked gaze, he placed her on his shoulder for about 10 seconds. He deliberately did not let Feng Ling struggle and spun several times on the spot before throwing her back onto the soft cushion on the ground. The cushion was soft, so it didn't matter if she fell down, but at the same time, Chen Beiqing regretted it. Afraid that she would be hurt, he turned back and wanted to pull her up, but Feng Ling kicked him away in anger. Just as they were arguing and tearing each other apart, her movements became unsteady. His movements also became unsteady, and he suddenly fell down, pressing on top of her. Seeing the cold-faced female coach was pushed down on the spot, the surrounding people whistled even more, accompanied by all kinds of exclamations. Chen Beiqing was also taken aback for a moment. This was something he didn't expect. Feng Ling looked at him coldly. Get up. Chen Beiqing looked at her, a little moved and a little apologetic in his eyes. He got up and was about to pull her up, but Feng Ling didn't even look at his hand. She got up and asked coldly, "How do you know I have a wound on my shoulder? You haven't learned anything else, but you've learned to attack people's weaknesses? I noticed that every time I touched your left shoulder, you looked uncomfortable about 8 out of 10 times. Although I'm not sure if it's because of an old injury, with my ability as a beginner, if I want to throw you over my shoulder, I can only use your weakness. Although it's a bit despicable, it's still a method of close combat. This is what you said in class. Have you forgotten?" Chen Beiqing looked at her calmly. Feng Ling was speechless and didn't say anything more. She just raised her hand and motioned him to stand back. After this class, the head coach and the person in charge of the martial arts club arranged a celebration party for her to win the National Women's Close Combat Championship. Originally, Feng Ling wore a mask and didn't say her real name. She only reported a code name, but it didn't matter if she was recognized. However, she didn't plan to be high profile. It was just that she didn't have anything to do at that time. Every day, she just went to class and rested. Her life seemed to have lost its purpose and she was numb. The head coach saw her situation and asked her if she wanted to try to compete. In the past 2 months, she had been preparing for the competition and often trained by herself. Now that she won the championship, she didn't know what to do. The so-called celebration banquet was nothing more than a meal and a drink. She couldn't drink as much as usual, but she had been working outside for so long, so she had to drink a few glasses. After everyone had eaten and drank, she declined others who offered to send her home and took a taxi back to her current residence in Boston. She only drank a few glasses of wine in the evening, but she was not drunk. At most, she smelled of alcohol and was slightly tipsy. She walked into a student apartment building between Polytechnic University and Harvard University, got into the elevator, and pressed the number of the 15th floor. This was the place she had rented for the past 2 years. It was a small apartment of about 50 square meters. The environment here was not bad, and because it was rented to international students all year round, the price was relatively not too expensive. The living environment around it was not particularly luxurious. Life here was very peaceful. She got out of the elevator, took the key, opened the door, entered the door, turned on the light, threw down the bag, kicked off the shoes, and then sat on the sofa in a daze for a night. They all said that this was the life of ordinary people. Different from her life in the jungle, there was no excitement, no sense of achievement when searching for food. There was no physical training in devil training every day in 11 base, no sniper rifle, no sweat, and no life and death missions. It seemed that she finally lived like others, but lost her original self. As the night deepened, Feng Ling was not sleepy on the sofa. She got up and took a shower. After coming out, while drying her hair, she sat on the sofa and turned on the TV. She casually dialed a channel and parked it on an entertainment program. She didn't watch the content but only heard the laughter of the audience. In this way, the entire quiet room became lively. After drying her hair, she put her hand on her shoulder. This was the place where she was bitten by a snake during the mission in the Snake Valley. Although it was said to be an old wound, it actually didn't hurt anymore. She didn't know why. It didn't hurt at all, and she didn't even feel it at all, but as soon as it was touched, her heart seemed to be torn and suddenly hurt fiercely. She felt uncomfortable all over. So inexplicably, it became an instinctive reaction. The place on her shoulder that left a small white cross became her sensitive point and couldn't be touched. It seemed to be a sore spot. At this time, the phone on the coffee table rang. Feng Ling brushed her wet hair with her hand, picked it up casually, glanced at the caller ID, and picked it up. Feng Ling, I accidentally switched to an American sports channel on TV today and saw an American close combat competition. Are you the champion of the women's group? Wen Liqing's voice came from the phone. Feng Ling paused and didn't explain but asked, how can you be sure that it was me? I'm not completely sure. I just feel that in my limited knowledge, I can only think of you as a girl with such great skills and such clean speed. Moreover, that girl's height is about the same as yours. In addition, that code name is 0. Although this 0 isn't Ling, based on my understanding of you, I feel that this 0 must be you. Feng Ling smiled lightly. There is always someone better. Maybe it really isn't me. Chapter 10:10. Wen Liqing smiled. You don't have to explain to me. It doesn't matter whether it's you or not. Anyway, I won't tell others. In the past 2 years, only I know your cell phone number, and only I know how you left. Although you have been unwilling to tell me where you are now, I won't ask much, but Feng Ling, please don't find me annoying. Nanheng has been looking for you crazily for the past 2 years. Hearing this name, the smile in Feng Ling's eyes gradually disappeared. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up first. Feng Ling. Wen Liqing said helplessly, I'm not a lobbyist. I know how miserable you were when you were kicked out of the base. I saw you lying on the roadside with my own eyes, but in the past 2 years, Nanheng has been in the base, and the elders of the Li family are not allowed to enter the base. He hasn't returned to the Li family for 2 years and refused to see the elders. He has really been looking for you. Although I don't know why he married you, I can see that he is not pretending to love you. He must have some difficulties that are hard to explain. Many times, a person's words are not necessarily honest, but if a person doesn't explain himself, it may not be as bad as others say. Maybe there are other reasons. Wen Liqing said helplessly, I'm not a lobbyist. I know how miserable you were when you were kicked out of the base. It's not important, Miss Wen. It's been so long. I've long forgotten about it, Feng Ling said lightly. I'm very grateful to you for keeping my secret and not asking me where I am now. I can only say that I'm living a good life now. My life is peaceful, my work is stable, and everything is good. I don't need to worry about anything. I don't want to get involved with those people and things in the past. As time passes, I and that group of people will forget each other. How could you forget? If you really forget, you won't wear a mask in this kind of competition. You wear a mask because you don't want anyone to recognize you and find you. If you don't want to be found, it means that you haven't forgotten at all. Feng Ling didn't speak anymore and just looked at the audience sitting under the stage who had been laughing, but she seemed to feel nothing and couldn't find anything funny. Miss Wen, I am very grateful for your help back then, but I really want to bid farewell to everything in the past. So, don't mention anything about those people or that person to me anymore. I don't really want to hear it. You should know that if it weren't for the kindness you've shown me, perhaps a cold and heartless person like me might have cut off all contact with you. Of course, I'm not overestimating myself. I'm just expressing my position. Wen Liqing sighed. I understand, but Nanheng has been looking for you for the past 2 years. The work in the hospital is so busy. It's rare for me to be free. Rest early. Good night. Feng Ling hung up the phone. Feng Ling casually used the head coach's card to receive the money. In the past few years, she had never used her real name and borrowed other people's bank cards. The head coach was good to her and wouldn't touch her things. Recently, because of the championship prize, he had been urging her to buy a small house and settle down with the money so that she wouldn't have to rent a house all the time. Feng Ling didn't have any concept of these things. She just wanted to eat well and have a place to live. However, the coaches in the martial arts club all persuaded her like this, so she had to look around. There were no new buildings nearby, and most of them were small apartments suitable for foreign students. She liked a duplex of about 60 square meters near the place where she lived now. Her prize money and the salary she had saved in the past 2 years were just enough for a down payment. It was not a bad idea to buy an apartment that she could decorate to her liking. So she bought it. Because it was not a new building, the original owner of this apartment decorated it in a messy style. She had the whole house demolished and redecorated, so she couldn't live in it for the time being. Considering that she had to live in at least half a year later, she still had to live in the small house she rented. Anyway, she was used to living there, so it didn't matter where she lived. However, although the people around her were happy for her, they all knew her temper and didn't spread it around. Because she wore a mask and they respected her idea of keeping a low profile, they didn't say it to others except for discussing and envying each other. The days passed peacefully. The only exception was Chen Beiqing, who would ask someone to send a bouquet of flowers before each class. "Coach Ling, where should I put the flowers today? Directly into the trash can? Or directly into the cleaning auntie's car?" A coach passed by outside and happened to sign for the flowers. Then he came in with the flowers with a smile on his face. Feng Ling was sitting at the desk watching the recent simulation courses in the martial arts club. Hearing the noise, she didn't even lift her eyelids. "Whatever. Tisk, whatever. By the way, that classmate Chen is really good to you. He knows that you never look him in the eye, but he never gives up. He sends you flowers 3 times a week, and each time he sends you flowers. Today, it's champagne roses flown in from France. It smells so good." Feng Ling still didn't lift her eyelids and continued to watch the simulation courses on the computer. Seeing that she was as cold and indifferent as ever, the coach tooted and threw the bouquet in his hand to the passing cleaning auntie. After class, Chen Beiqing said that today was his friend's birthday and he needed a female companion. Feng Ling directly refused. Chen Beiqing said regretfully, "If you don't go with me today, I will keep following you until you agree." Feng Ling didn't bother to talk to him. She packed up her things and went home. She drove back to the place where she lived and was about to walk in. Suddenly, she stopped and felt that someone seemed to be following her. She turned around but saw no one. Then she looked at the cars around and coldly picked up the phone to call Chen Beiqing. After the call went through, she was about to ask him if he really dared to follow her. In the end, the other party picked up the phone. She heard the noise in the private room, and it didn't sound like he was tailing her. "Where are you?" Feng Ling asked with a frown. Chen Beiqing smiled on the phone. "What? Do you regret not coming out with me? I'm already drunk. I can't drive to pick you up now. How about I send someone to pick you up?" "No, I won't go." Feng Ling abruptly hung up the phone, lowered her eyes, and walked in. As she walked, she kept an eye on the movements behind her. Someone was following her. And this person could not be found by her when she was driving. Obviously, he was better than her in all aspects. Who could it be? Qing Qing will go to Shanghai to participate in the Yuan Super IP Storm Festival in the next few days. There are a lot of activities on the schedule. I may have to write on the plane. I will try to keep updating regularly. Chapter 10-11. Sensing the presence of the person behind her, Feng Ling did not go home directly but turned into a supermarket nearby. She bought some things in the supermarket and pushed the shopping cart while paying attention to the people behind her and behind the nearby shopping racks from time to time. She strolled back and forth in the supermarket for half an hour. The sky outside was already dark. Feeling that the person didn't seem to be following her, she paid the bill and went out. After walking out of the supermarket, she did not go back immediately. She walked around the parking lot again and looked at all the cars parked there one by one. She had lived here for 1.5 years, and she had an impression of every car that was often parked downstairs. Her naturally keen observation skills allowed her to instinctively notice a car that she had never seen before. However, in the past few days, she had not seen any unfamiliar people or cars, including just now. There were no people or strange movements. After returning to the car, she sat quietly for another hour. After confirming that the person seemed to have left, she quietly closed the car door and quickly walked into the building where she lived. When she arrived at the floor where she lived, she looked around again and raised her eyes to the corridor security monitoring equipment in the corner of the corridor that was normally lit. After thinking for a while, she entered the door. This situation of being suspected of being followed lasted for about 3 days. Every time when Fong Ling returned home from outside, she felt that someone seemed to be watching her from behind, but she could not find any car or suspicious person. On the 3rd day, she simply turned around and walked to all the places nearby that could hide a person. Whether it was behind a tree, in a corner between buildings, or in a shadow, or in a coffee shop, dessert shop, or a small restaurant downstairs, all kinds of people were there, but they were all eating and shopping normally. It was different from the stares she felt from the people following her. Since she came to Boston, she had not provoked anyone, and no one knew who she used to be. She had no enemies. If she really did offend someone, it was probably the gang of gangsters who helped Chen Beiqing back then. However, it had been so long. If they had the ability to take revenge, they definitely wouldn't have waited until a year and a half later. A few days ago, the head coach told her to pay attention to her safety. After all, the black tight suit she wore on the fighting field was too sexy. Not only did she make a lot of money, but her figure was also so good. At that time, it was even broadcasted on TV, and many people saw it. Once someone recognized her, it was likely that they would disguise themselves as a lecherous tram and plot against her. Of course, ordinary perverts couldn't beat her. However, the person who was following her was clearly not an ordinary person. To be able to stand outside of all her defenses and cautiousness, and not even a trace of it could be found. Whether it was in martial arts or acuity, he was above her. Inexplicably, a thought suddenly jumped into her mind. Her face suddenly turned cold. She stopped looking and turned to quickly walk back. After returning home, she threw down her bag and walked to the window to look out. It was still quiet downstairs, and there was no hidden car driving away. It was so quiet that it seemed as though she had been overthinking for the past 3 days. Knock, knock. Just as Fong Ling took off her coat and was about to prepare some dinner for herself, she suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. Hearing the rhythmic knocking, her hair instantly stood on end. She turned to look at the knocking door and walked over. Through the door, she was not sure who was standing outside. She only looked at the door coldly and thought of all the possibilities. Then she remembered that the other party's martial arts skills were above hers. Apart from that person, she really couldn't think of anyone else who would be bored enough to follow her. She abruptly opened the door and looked out coldly. However, she saw a middle-aged man in work uniform standing outside with a cardboard box in his hand. "Hello, Miss Ling, is this your express delivery?" Fong Ling looked at the box in his hand and then looked at the man in front of her. "When did you come up?" "I don't remember having anything to express. I have a habit of delivering packages from the upper floors, 1 floor at a time. There were 2 packages waiting to be delivered upstairs, so I came down directly from the safety escalator." The delivery man smiled politely at her and handed her a pen. "Please sign here." Fong Ling was puzzled and reached out to take the box. She saw that the address of the organizer of the close combat competition was written on the sender's side. Only then did she put down her guard, sign for it, and close the door. She opened the box and saw that there was a trophy and commemorative doll sent by the organizer. There was also a set of black combat uniform with the organizer's name printed on it. It was completely made according to her figure. After checking the things in the box, Fong Ling sat on the sofa and looked at the golden trophy. Suddenly, she sighed and smiled. It seemed that she was thinking too much. She had been hiding carefully for so long. How could she find her? There were classes all day on weekends. Fong Ling took over 3 classes, not only Chen Beiqing's. The martial arts club was divided into 3 levels of learning courses, junior high and senior high. She taught all 3 levels. These students only had 3 classes a week on average, but all her classes added up to more than 6 hours a day. The busier her work was, the more fulfilling and stable her life was. The head coach and the boss of the martial arts club especially liked her because she was not afraid of hard work. As long as there was a need, as long as she could do it, she would not refuse. Other coaches always wanted to have a holiday on the weekend to accompany their families and girlfriends. Only Fong Ling had a full schedule every day and never took a day off. Even when she did have a holiday, she would sit in the coach's office and watch those basic martial arts moves. Once she did, she would watch them for a whole day. In the eyes of her colleagues and students, she didn't live like a woman at all. But she was beautiful and didn't even know it. She had a different kind of charm. There was one last class in the afternoon on Sunday. The other coaches had gone home, and only Fong Ling waited for the students in the martial arts club. When the students arrived one after another, she took a look at the time. There were still 10 minutes before the class began, so she continued to sit in the office. After a while, she got up with a cup and was about to pour herself a glass of water. However, as soon as she walked around the desk, she suddenly saw Chen Beiqing coming in with a large bouquet of red roses. Looking at the familiar bouquet of roses and then at Chen Beiqing who came with the roses in his arms, Fong Ling glanced at him indifferently and walked past him with the cup in her hand, not even looking at him. Chapter 10-12. Coach Ah Ling, it's Christmas in 2 days. Let's go on a date. Chen Beiqing had long been used to her indifference. Seeing that she just went to the water dispenser by the wall to get water, he turned to look at her and said gently. Fong Ling patiently took the water and said coldly, "No, you can give up. I'm not interested in you." Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows, put the bouquet of roses on her desk, and turned to walk over. "I've been chasing you for so long. Can't you see that I really like you?" Fong Ling picked up the glass that had been filled, turned around and saw him standing next to her. She frowned. "Excuse me." Chen Beiqing didn't move aside. The young man was over 1.85 meters tall and looked very tall in front of her who was about 1.7 meters tall. It seemed that only when he looked at her condescendingly could he feel that she was actually a little woman, not the cold-faced coach who usually stood in front of him coldly. Seeing that he didn't move aside, Fong Ling immediately looked at him coldly. "If you don't want to go to class, I'll go there later. If you're late for even 1 minute, I'll treat you as a truant. I'll go with you." Fong Ling looked at him speechlessly. "What on earth do you want to do?" "I like you and want to be your boyfriend." Chen Beiqing was very calm and then looked at her shoulder. "I'm sorry about the shoulder throw last time. I just wanted to see how it feels to successfully lift you up. I didn't want to hurt you. If I hurt you, I apologize." Fong Ling pursed her lips. "I didn't hurt you. You think too much. You're good at learning. You don't need to apologize to me. Hurry up and get ready for class." When she was about to turn and walk away, Chen Beiqing reached out and held her wrist. "Ah Ling, I'm very curious about you. What kind of experience did a young girl have? How can you be so good at martial arts and have such a calm character? If you don't want to talk about your past, I don't mind, but since you have such a temper, it means that your past is not happy. From now on, I will give you happiness and happiness. Give me a chance, okay?" Fong Ling suddenly felt a little funny. These men were all like this. When they liked someone, they would confess and take it. When they didn't like someone anymore, or when they had to leave, they wouldn't give the woman any explanation. Such a thing as affection, isn't it the most untrustworthy? After 2 seconds of silence, she pulled her hand out of his. "Go to class. Don't talk nonsense. You're just a 20-year-old girl. Do you really think I'll believe the nonsense you told me back then? You lied about your age. According to the coach's profile, you're only 20 years old now. That is to say, when you helped me last year, you were only 19 years old. What's wrong with my age? Even if I'm 15, I can still beat you to the ground. This is a martial arts club, not a blind date. What right do you have to judge others? Here, let martial arts do the talking." Chen Beiqing smiled. "Sometimes I really feel sorry for you when you are clearly unhappy but still want to pretend to be mature." Fong Ling, she suddenly turned around and put the cup on the desk. She didn't drink the water and didn't bother to look at the flowers on the table. She tied her clothes and waist belt, turned to walk out of the office, and was about to go to the classroom. Chen Beiqing was silent for a while. Standing at the door, he suddenly reached out to stop her. When Feng Ling turned to look at him in surprise, he put his long arm around her and was about to pull her into his arms again, but Feng Ling quickly raised her leg and kicked hard against his thigh. When Chen Beiqing's face changed and he lowered his head to glare at her, she easily pushed him forward, avoided his hug, and walked out of the door. A master. She couldn't beat him. She couldn't even launch a gentle attack. After she left, Chen Beiqing rubbed his hand on his thigh and hissed. He looked back at the back of the woman who walked into the classroom. He helplessly raised his hand to touch his clean short hair and walked back into the classroom in frustration. When they entered the classroom, a group of male students saw that she and Chen Beiqing came in one after the other. They immediately whistled and asked, "Coach Ah Ling, tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and the day after tomorrow is Christmas Day. What are you going to do? Do you have a date?" Feng Ling was expressionless. "I have classes tomorrow and the day after tomorrow." "Oh, what classes?" "Even if there are classes, I guess the students will ask for leave tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I think you might as well take a break for 2 days. If you don't have any activities these 2 days, we'll treat you to dinner." "Class." Feng Ling looked at them coldly. As soon as the group of male students received her gaze, they didn't dare to say a word and hurriedly got ready, but their eyes still glanced at her from time to time, and then at Chen Beiqing, who was expressionless. She wondered if Chen Beiqing had succeeded in pursuing her. It was almost Christmas, but he couldn't even ask her for a date. TSK. The so-called Christmas was an exciting festival for these international students. According to them, it was even more exciting than the New Year in China. It was a festival for young people, but Feng Ling, who was younger than them, couldn't feel any festive atmosphere at all. She had never celebrated any festival. 2 days later, on Christmas Day, all the students indeed asked for leave today. After refusing the invitation of several coaches to have dinner together, she drove back to her residence alone. In the past few days, it seemed that no one was following him, so he was more relaxed on the way back. There were many men and women wearing thick clothes walking side by side on the roadside. Occasionally, he would pass by a huge Christmas tree, and he could often see couples from all over the world hugging and kissing under it. The whole street was full of red Santa Claus going out at night. Just like this, she watched the neon scenery and the crowd along the way until she drove back to her apartment. There were all kinds of colorful lights and a beautiful Christmas tree downstairs. After getting out of the car, Feng Ling looked at the Christmas tree over there. It seemed that every time there was such a lively festival, she could feel that she didn't fit in with this world. Walking towards the Christmas tree with all kinds of colorful lights hanging on it, she looked up at the big star at the top of the tree. Next to her, a little girl wearing a snow-white dress ran past with a big red apple-shaped light in her hand. As she ran, she turned around and told her parents her wish for this year in English. It seemed that they were all very happy. It seemed that no matter if it was lovers, friends, family, colleagues, or classmates, they would all have all kinds of people to accompany them. Feng Ling raised her hand and touched the snow hanging on the Christmas tree. It was cold to the bone. Just as she was about to turn, she suddenly saw a figure from the corner of her eye. Chapter 10:13. She even thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. In this world of ice and snow, the white fog drifting out of her mouth obscured half of her vision. Feng Ling narrowed her eyes and carefully looked in that direction but saw nothing. Her eyes darkened, and she turned to look at her surroundings again. Still, there was nothing. There shouldn't be anything. She turned to leave the Christmas tree, bought a bowl of instant noodles at the convenience store downstairs, and then returned to her residence. The elevator reached the 15th floor. The moment she stepped out, she sharply raised her eyes to look at the man standing in front of her residence. The man was dressed in black casual sportswear. His hands were in his trouser pockets, and he leaned against the door leisurely. When he heard the elevator door open, he raised his eyes to look at her. His gaze shifted from her startled and cold gaze to the instant noodles in her hands. "You only bought one for me?" The man raised his cold brows slightly. His words sounded as though they hadn't seen each other for 2 years but had just been separated for 2 days. Fong Ling resisted the urge to crush the instant noodles in her hands. She looked at him expressionlessly and hesitated, wondering if she should return to the elevator and leave immediately before the elevator left. However, before she could make up her mind, the man had already taken his hands out of his trouser pockets. He casually stretched his arms to the sides and held them against the elevator doors. He looked down at Fong Ling, who had unconsciously taken a step back. "Do you want to go downstairs and talk in the cold wind of -10 degrees, or do you want to stand here and talk?" Fong Ling coldly looked at him. She knew that her heart was calm enough. Back then, she was very calm, let alone now. However, Li Nanheng's sudden appearance was indeed unexpected to her. So, a few days ago, he had already come to Boston. In the past few days, when she felt someone behind her, it was him. She did not speak. She glanced at the number on the elevator door and said heavily, "Move." Li Nanheng looked at the expressionless little woman and watched her deeply. As she wished, his hand moved away from the elevator door. Fong Ling directly walked out through the gap in front of the door. She placed the instant noodles in her hands on the shelf in front of the door but had no intention of opening the door to enter. "What are you doing here?" She faced the door with her back to the man behind her. There was no warmth in her voice. "She's been missing for 2 years. I've been searching for her for 2 years. It's as if she had vanished from the face of the earth." Suddenly, one day, she appeared in all the major magazines as the national women's close combat champion. "Tell me, why am I here?" The man's voice was right behind her. His tone was calm as if everything that had happened in the past 2 years had passed. As long as he found her now, everything would be fine. Fong Ling had a million pills of regret in her heart, but it was useless. When she participated in the competition, she was just looking for something to do because her life was too monotonous and boring. She had no idea that she would appear on TV and appear in magazines. She didn't expect that even though she was wearing a mask, people familiar with her could still recognize her. Even Wen Liqing could recognize her, let alone Li Nanheng. But she never thought that one day she would see him again. Fong Ling turned around and looked at the man behind her who was much taller than her. "Mr. Li, the reason why I left was not because I wanted to escape, but because I was forced to leave by several people in charge of the Li family. I lost all my face and was forced to leave. So, the so-called missing for 2 years and being searched for by someone for 2 years shouldn't exist. I have no reason to be searched for, and you have no reason to look for me. Now, there's no need for me to be here." Looking at the young and inexperienced short-haired girl in the past, she had transformed into a petite woman with short hair over her ears in 2 years. However, her emotions and her expression were cold and unfamiliar. She didn't allow anyone to get close to her. Li Nanheng looked at her coldly and stepped forward. At the moment when Fong Ling took a step back defensively, he lowered his eyes and looked into her cold eyes. "What did you call me just now?" "Not boss, not Li Nanheng." "Mr. Li?" Fong Ling's voice was calm. "I'm no longer a member of 11 Base. What should I call you?" As she spoke, she suddenly felt that she didn't seem to have done anything wrong, and there was no need to escape. She raised her eyes and looked into his cold eyes. "Mr. Li, I've heard others say that it's common for men and women to fall in love, and it's also common for them to suddenly break up for no reason. Feelings come and go quickly, so I won't pursue any of the past with you, and please don't pester me because of that. Let's part on good terms. This is what I should have said 2 years ago, but unfortunately, your grandfathers didn't give me a chance to say these words and asked me to leave." "Part on good terms?" Li Nanheng's eyes instantly sharpened. He lowered his head and approached her again. Feng Ling didn't expect him to suddenly lower his head. She took another step back and leaned against the door behind her. The man pressed down on her. Just as she was about to move away, he raised his hand and held her shoulders, pressing her firmly against the door. Feng Ling, King searched for you for 2 years. Now you're telling me to part ways on good terms? Did I say I wanted to break up? Did I say feelings come and go quickly? When did I say I didn't want you? Feng Ling thought she had heard wrong. For so many years, she had always thought that Li Nanheng was rational. At least, his 3 views should be normal. How could a married man say that he didn't want to break up with another woman? How could he say that he still wanted another woman? Even if she was very ignorant when it came to matters of the heart, she still knew what it meant to be a person. But she found that in the past 2 years, the things she had gained and the things she had lost in her heart had made her more stable. Especially regarding Li Nanheng's matter, she didn't want to pursue what was right or wrong, nor did she want to argue with him. Thus, she only looked at the man who pressed her against the door. She looked at the anger and pity hidden in his eyes for 2 years. She only looked at him calmly. Oh, it's very simple. That is, I don't want you anymore. I don't want you anymore. Li Nanheng endured for 2 whole years, even though he knew that she was too strong and stubborn, and there were too many things that she couldn't easily accept. He finally found her. Seeing that her life was too peaceful, he couldn't bear to disturb her. But in the end, because she was alone under the Christmas tree, he wanted to hug her too much. But because he couldn't restrain himself for a moment, he finally waited for the knife that stabbed his heart 2 years later to return. The man's gaze was dark and heavy as he watched her. Without waiting for him to speak, Feng Ling said coldly, "Let go." Chapter 10:14. The man did not retreat, nor did he let go. He merely lowered his eyes to look at her. I've been walking alone for 2 years. Now that I've finally found you, do you think I'll let go so easily? What else can I do? Mr. Li, do you think I'll go back and be a shameless third party who knows I'm a third party? Feng Ling looked at him calmly. I'm very calm. It's been so long, and I don't have any complaints or blame you. I won't pester you. What's there for you to pester me? Li Nanheng's grip on her shoulder tightened. Do you remember I told you to wait for me for 3 years? As if she had heard a joke, Feng Ling's expressionless face suddenly broke into a mocking sneer. She raised her hand and pushed his arm away. She took out the key to open the door and said indifferently with her back to him, I don't remember anything I shouldn't remember. Please go back. Feng Ling, give me a chance to explain. Some things can't be helped. It's also my responsibility. The door was opened. Feng Ling turned back to look at him. I know that many things can't be explained with just a few words. If you could explain, you would have explained it to me 2 years ago before you got married. There's no need to say anything now. I've already let it go. There's nothing to say. With that, she went straight into the room. The door suddenly met with some resistance. She turned to look at the man's hand on the door. She glanced at it coldly, put down his hand, and turned to look at him. Do you want to come in? You used to be like this too. You said that if you want to break into my world, you must break in. No matter how many defenses I set up, they were broken by you again and again. In the end, you got what you wanted and left. Now, it seems that I can't stop you if you want to come in. What do you want? The short-haired girl in front of him no longer had the attitude of a young girl. Instead, she seemed to be in between a young girl and a woman. Her eyes were even colder than when she was in 11 base. In that coldness, there was a lot of experience and firmness that he had never experienced, and even a lot of calmness that he didn't want to see. Anger and haggling were the signs of deep love. Deep fear, hatred, and resentment were also signs of love. But there was nothing in her eyes. It was so faint that not even a trace of his existence could be found. Li Nanheng slowly put down his hand, looked at her for a long time, and said hoarsely, rest early. Feng Ling did not reply. She slammed the door with a pang and locked it from the inside, completely blocking the man's line of sight. Usually, this room was very quiet, but tonight, it seemed to be very lively outside. Because of this, her room was even quieter. It was unusually quiet. Feng Ling stood at the door and didn't even look at the closed door behind her. The next morning, the post-holiday atmosphere continued. When the curtains were drawn, one could see the world of ice and snow outside. There were also many couples who had woken up early, wearing thick clothes and jogging outside. The lights on the Christmas tree from last night had been turned off, but the colorful decorations on it still shone with all kinds of dazzling colors in the morning light. Feng Ling didn't have much to do in the morning. Most of her classes were after 10 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon. She fried an egg for herself and baked 2 pieces of bread. She casually smeared some blueberry-flavored jam, put a piece of vegetable leaf and a slice of ham on it, and cut it into pieces to eat as a sandwich. After eating, she put on her coat and prepared to go out for a run. Although she had already left the base and did not need to train every day, her living habits had long been formed. The exercises she taught the students in class every day were not enough. She still needed to run 2 or 3 kilometers every morning to feel comfortable. She had just opened the door and was about to step out when out of the corner of her eye, she suddenly saw the figure standing in front of the window by the corridor. She raised her eyes and saw Li Nanheng standing there. The man's back was against the morning light outside the window. She was startled, looked down at the time on her wrist, and then looked at the man. Hearing the door open, Li Nanheng turned to look at her. "Did you sleep well?" She saw that the man was still wearing the same clothes from last night and smelled some smoke. She turned to see that there were a few more cigarette butts on the smoking box by the elevator. "You were here last night?" She turned back to look at him. At this moment, the man's back was facing the morning light outside the window. He looked at her and did not admit or deny it. He only said, "At least I didn't disturb your rest last night." Feng Ling looked at him speechlessly, her eyes still cold. "So you released secondhand smoke at my door?" Li Nanheng's cold brows moved. He raised his eyes to look at the air conditioner and the passage that released the smoke. "I saw the word smoking area written on the side of the safety stairs. Besides, your door is very good. The secondhand smoke shouldn't affect you." Feng Ling really admired Li Nanheng's shameless behavior. She held the door handle. "Why are you waiting at my door?" "I have to go to work. I don't have time to deal with you." "Didn't I let you go last night? Did I say I was leaving?" Feng Ling frowned. "So I don't want to talk to you. I've said everything I should say last night. I'll say it again. I've already let it go. I don't want to mention anything about the past. I have to go to work now." The man put one hand in his trouser pocket. He first lowered his head and smiled. Then he raised his eyebrows and turned to look at her. "I don't want to talk to you now. You go to work. I won't disturb you. Then you can leave." "I'll go where?" "Go back to the hotel, back to Los Angeles, back to the car, or back to where everything belongs to you. Go wherever you want. It has nothing to do with me. Who told you I lived in a hotel? I drove here. I've been in the car for the past few days. I haven't eaten or slept well. After seeing you, I was cut into pieces by your mouth again. I'm in a very bad mood right now." The man looked at her and said matter-of-factly, "I stood outside your door all night last night. You should go to work. I'll go in and sleep." "Feng Ling, you went into my house to sleep? Is there a problem?" Feng Ling wondered if this man really didn't know what it meant to be shameless. "I don't seem to have a reason to take you in. Last night, you were afraid that I would go in and do something to you, so I didn't go in to disturb you. Now you're going out. Let me go in and sleep for a while." "No. No." Feng Ling refused very decisively. Chapter 10:15. There's a man in the family that I can't see. The man stared at her. Feng Ling's face was cold. No. Is there anything in the house that I can't see? No. Then why can't I go in and sleep? You could sleep anywhere, but you just had to sleep in my house. I've been standing outside all night. Do you want me to go back to the car and sleep? That's your business. I don't care. Li Nanheng looked at her for a while and coughed lightly. All right, I'll go back to the car. She saw that the man was indeed thinner than 2 years ago. It was not that his figure was thin. His figure had always been perfect, but his entire body felt thin. Obviously, he had not been living well in the past 2 years, and he really did not rest well in the past few days. Feng Ling looked at his back and did not feel her heart soften. She just looked at the many cigarette butts, the man's slightly messy hair, and his slightly haggard face. Indeed, there was nothing in her house that could not be seen by others. It was well behaved and not messy. There was nothing that could not be seen. Even if they were no longer in a relationship, even if she had let go of what happened in the past, he was still her boss. Did you really stand here the entire night without sleeping? She asked softly. The man who had already walked to the elevator door had his back facing her. He also glanced at the cigarette butts over there, then turned back to look at her from the corner of his eye. What do you think? You're already so sleepy, what's the point of being so cocky? Feng Ling looked at his back expressionlessly, pushed the door open, and took a step out. Go in and sleep. I'll be home before 6:30 p.m. Leave before I get home. Don't let me see you when I come back. Li Nanheng looked back at her and she said, I'll take the key. Just close the door when you leave. Also, you're only allowed to sleep on the sofa. Don't touch anything else. Don't dirty my house. This time, Li Nanheng simply turned around and looked down at the woman who was almost in front of him. I'm a germaphobe. How dirty do you think I will be? Feng Ling did not speak but glanced at him again. Aren't you sleepy and need to sleep? If you don't go in, I'll lock the door. Li Nanheng looked at her sportswear and the bag in her hand. You don't pretend to be a man anymore. Why are you still so rude? Feng Ling couldn't be bothered with him. She pressed the elevator button and did not speak further. Seeing that she was really in a hurry to go out and obviously didn't want to talk, Li Nanheng didn't rush to say more. He glanced at her impatient and indifferent expression, turned and walked in. When he entered the door, he suddenly asked, Is there breakfast at home? No. Feng Ling stood in front of the elevator and responded coldly. Then why didn't you eat just now? Yes, I have. You didn't leave any? I don't raise a cat or a dog at home. I eat as much as I can. What's there to keep? Looking at the slowly rising number in the elevator, she said, There's bread in the fridge. If you want to eat it, bake it yourself. Well, I'm going to sleep first. I'll eat when I wake up. The man closed the door after he finished speaking. Feng Ling, looking at the elevator in front of him in silence, he felt upset no matter how he thought about it. She felt that she shouldn't have let him in. Although, it was true that last night, he was very well behaved and didn't barge in as domineeringly as before. He was also very polite and stayed outside for the whole night. He didn't beg for forgiveness in front of her, nor did he pester her to explain, nor did he force himself on her. But now, he was so shameless. It wasn't until the door was closed from the inside that Feng Ling realized what she was thinking. Why did she let him in? If he was too domineering, she would definitely reject him. But he seemed to be doing the opposite. The elevator door opened. There was no time to think too much. She walked into the elevator, looked back at the closed door, frowned slightly, and then closed the door. When she left the apartment building, she lost interest in running in the morning. She went to the parking lot and sat in the car. Feeling the ultra-low temperature outside the car for a whole night, she thought of the man who said that he had been sleeping in the car for the past few days. What did he want to do? If he knew her well enough, no, it should be said that he definitely knew her well enough. He should be very clear that no matter what, she and he could not go back to the way they were 2 years ago. It was also impossible for her to have any ambiguous feelings with a man who was already married, or to have feelings that were beyond reason. He should know that there was no need for him to stay here because there would be no result. 6:00 in the evening. It's time to get off work. Why haven't you left today? The head coach had just finished the last class of the day. When he entered the office, he saw Fong Ling sitting in front of the computer with a cup in her arms. Fong Ling looked up at him. Nothing. Sit in the office for a while. The weather is so cold. Why are you sitting here? It's so warm at home. The head coach smiled. Did you drive here? Do you need me to send you back? Yes, I can go back by myself. Fong Ling put down the cup and looked at the time. I'll leave at 6:30. The head coach looked at her again. Are you feeling unwell? No. Usually, you go home on time after getting off work. Why don't you want to go back today? Fong Ling didn't answer but smiled slightly and still didn't speak. She was not sure whether Li Nanheng had left or not, nor did she know if he had woken up. She felt that if she went back a little later, she might be able to miss him, but she was not sure. She would delay as long as she could. She already regretted letting him in. If it weren't for the fact that the weather was too cold, she would have strolled outside all night. It was 6:40 p.m. The lights inside and outside the martial arts club had been turned off, leaving only the office open. The area around the Polytechnic University was a school district with a very strict management system. Some of the martial arts dojos and the like must strictly follow the prescribed time to rest. If they continued to keep the lights on, they might be suspected of increasing the class time and might be investigated. Seeing that she couldn't delay any longer, Fong Ling got up to pack up and drove home. When she drove to the apartment, she looked up and found that the lights in the room were dim. Did this mean that Li Nanheng had already left? After staring up for a while, Fong Ling hesitated and got out of the car to go home. When she arrived at the door, she opened the door with the key and walked in. Looking at the dark room, she raised her hand and touched the wall. With a pa sound, the lights in the small living room suddenly turned on. Chapter 10:16. The moment the light returned, a man was lying on the small sofa that had always been empty. The moment the light came on, it was clearly too bright. The man frowned and casually grabbed a white pillow on the white carpet. He pressed it against his face and continued to sleep. The moment the light came on, it was clearly too bright. The man furrowed his brows and casually grabbed a white pillow on the white carpet. He pressed it against his face and continued to sleep. Fong Ling saw that he had not left and immediately stared coldly at the man on the sofa. She did not speak but raised her hand and placed it against the wall. She abruptly turned off the light. 5 seconds later, she turned it back on, turned it off, and turned it on again. After flashing for more than 10 times, the man finally could not take it anymore. He grabbed the useless pillow on his face and turned to look at her. What are you doing? Aren't you afraid that the light will be broken? Didn't I tell you that I would be back after 6:30 p.m.? I told you to leave before I came back. Isn't it enough for you to sleep here for a whole day? This time, Fong Ling turned on the light again and moved her hand away from the wall. Her expression was clearly not kind. Li Nanheng sat up on the sofa and raised his hand to push aside his slightly messy hair. He opened a pair of eyes that appeared to be very sleepy to say, I slept for a while when I came in this morning. Someone is renovating next door, so I didn't sleep well. In the afternoon, I studied your toaster for a long time and didn't eat anything. I slept with an empty stomach until now. I'm guessing that I'm physically weak, so I slept for a long time and didn't wake up. Fong Ling, what a wonderful reason. If she didn't know how domineering and shameless Li Nanheng was, she would have really believed him. Seeing her standing in front of the door with a cold expression, Li Nanheng leaned against the sofa as if he hadn't slept well. The man who was nearly 1.9 meters tall sat on such a small sofa. He felt that he could stretch his legs out of the edge of the carpet. He leaned his head against the back of the sofa lazily and said hoarsely, "Someone really renovated it." Fong Ling had just said that she had lived here for so long and had never heard of anyone renovating. However, before she could speak, she suddenly heard the loud sound of an electric drill hitting the wall next door. She swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. After restraining herself for a few seconds, she said, "No matter what, you've rested here. It's time to go." Li Nanheng stood up. Fong Ling saw that his black sportswear jacket was thrown to the side and that the iron-gray t-shirt on his body was slightly wrinkled due to sleeping. However, the wrinkles were inexplicably sexy, and the man's strong collarbone was almost exposed. Fong Ling calmly shifted her gaze away. "I'm going to wash my face." Li Nanheng did not say much and turned to enter the bathroom. At first, Fong Ling did not speak. However, when the man was about to enter her bedroom, her gaze suddenly changed. She abruptly raised her eyes to look over. Seeing that the man had already entered, she hurriedly followed him. By the time she reached the bedroom door, the man had already stepped into the bathroom. He was about to turn on the faucet when he saw something from the corner of his eye and turned to look. Fong Ling was about to shout, "Don't look." However, when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she felt that these two words were very strange. She couldn't help but stiffen. As expected, she saw the man's back stiffen for an instant. She was no longer dressed as a man. Although she wore sportswear every day, at least her underwear was normal. Every day, her underwear that she washed would be hung on a small drying rack above the bathroom. Right now, there were two sets of underwear on it, one white and the other flesh-colored. There was also a set of black sports-style underwear that she was wearing. Li Nanheng was only stunned for a moment. It seemed that he had long been used to having no taboos wherever Fong Ling was. After all, she had never had these things in her room before. He turned to look at Fong Ling, who was looking a little awkward. Fong Ling was only embarrassed for a moment. She glanced at the faucet by his hand. "After washing your face, hurry up and leave." Li Nanheng did not say anything. He washed his hands in the slightly cold water for a while before lowering his head to wash his face. Fong Ling could not be bothered to look at him. She turned to leave. The man washed his face very quickly. He casually washed his face a few times. It was likely that he knew that she did not have much patience with him right now. He did not use her towel and directly walked out with his face wet. He casually wiped his face with his hands and walked to the coffee table to pull out a few pieces of tissue paper to wipe his face. As the man wiped the water that was about to drip down his chin, he said, "There's a problem with your toaster. I haven't eaten anything all day. Right now, even if I want to leave, I don't have the strength." Each reason was more lame than the other. Fong Ling had long expected that he would not leave so easily. However, she also lost her patience. She walked to the sofa, picked up his coat, and threw it on him. "Even if you have to crawl, you have to get out." Li Nanheng received the coat and casually placed it in the crook of his arm. He then looked at her. "So heartless?" Fong Ling sneered. "Heartless is also related to love. Don't think too highly of yourself. There's nothing to talk about between us. It's just that there's no need to keep a distance between us. Mr. Li, on account of the fact that you were my boss and that you took good care of me, I allowed you to come in and sleep for a day. However, I'm sorry, you have already exceeded my tolerance." Li Nanheng smiled. He suddenly threw the coat in his hand back onto the sofa. The smile in his eyes was gone. He looked at her and his voice was cold and angry. "Your tolerance? What did you think the 2 years you were missing meant to me? The base chased you out, and you ran away without a word. You didn't even think to look for me. Why would I look for you? Did you abandon your new wife, put aside your honeymoon period, and return to the base to save me?" Fong Ling looked at him coldly. Even if I, Feng Ling, am a child raised by a wolf and don't understand the ways of the world, at least I know my own limits. New wife? Honeymoon period? Li Nanheng suddenly wanted to curse. However, it seemed that he could only curse himself. Back then, he had rejected Feng Mingzhu, and because the relationship between the two families could not be too stiff, how could he have thought of marrying a child cenotaph? All along, he had never had any concept of women. Back then, why didn't he think that he would really fall in love with a girl in this life? The man raised his hand and placed it on his forehead. He knocked himself hard twice. Damn it. Feng Ling said coldly. I remember that Feng Mingzhu hated me very much. It's probably because she saw the things between you and me. After all, you are her husband now. There are some things that you don't need me to remind you of. Please leave. Li Nanheng gritted his teeth. I didn't marry Feng Mingzhu. Chapter 10:17. Feng Ling looked at him indifferently. No matter who you marry, it has nothing to do with me. She bent down and picked up the pillow from the ground. Then, with a look of disgust on her face, she turned around and threw it into the dirty laundry basket, as if it couldn't be kept in her house unless it was washed. Looking at the little woman's obvious movements, every movement expressed her disgust, impatience, and disgust towards him. Li Nanheng suddenly recalled the day when he was not in the base. For the next 700 days and nights, he couldn't sleep at night whenever he thought of it. She drank an entire bottle of brandy alone and was thrown to the ground in public the next day. All her secrets and truths were revealed. All her face, all her dignity, and everything she insisted on were completely destroyed. Thinking about all of this, all of his unwillingness seemed to have turned into the fact that he deserved it. The man threw down his coat again. None of your business? Since you insist on looking at the past in this way, fine, I won't force you. Let's go for a meal. Feng Ling looked at him as if he was crazy and refused. I don't want to eat it. Li Nanheng didn't force her. He simply sat back on the sofa. Then I'll order takeout. I'll leave after eating. Before this, Feng Ling didn't believe that Li Nanheng would be so shameless. She looked at the man on the sofa coldly. Do you want to be a rogue to the end? The man crossed his legs calmly and answered, N. Can you beat me? Can you even push me? All the military and police in the United States are related to 11 Base. Do you think you can get me away even if you call the police now? Let's order takeout. The man's tone was lazy and indifferent. He just sat on her sofa and didn't leave. Feng Ling took a deep breath and suddenly turned into the kitchen. She threw the remaining pieces of bread in front of him and placed a bottle of jam heavily in front of him. Eat. We'll leave immediately after eating. Li Nanheng glanced at the two things on the coffee table. He was not picky about food. He reached out to pick them up and looked at them. You let me eat this at noon, but I didn't eat it. Now you want me to eat it at night? Do you want to eat or not? If you don't want to eat, scram. Feng Ling's patience had reached its limit. Looking at this man who was even more shameless than 2 years ago, all her composure and indifference instantly turned into a violent emotion. She really wanted to kick him down from the 15th floor. Li Nanheng did not look at her. He casually picked up the bottle of jam, glanced at it, and smiled. Blueberry. Feng Ling didn't have many sentimental feelings, but when she heard this, she suddenly remembered the blueberry cake he took her to eat. It seemed like she used to have a slight preference for blueberry-flavored things, but for some reason, it became an obsession. Everything seemed to be fixed on blueberry as the only option. She did not speak but glanced at the time. Can you finish it in 10 minutes? The man smeared the blueberry jam on the bread. In fact, the bread had been in the fridge for a whole day. It was not baked or heated. Even if it was not hard, it was definitely very cold and uncomfortable to eat. The man, on the other hand, took a few bites and ate the 2 pieces of bread with a bit of jam. Then, he continued to smear on the bread. In less than 3 to 4 minutes, he had finished the remaining pieces of bread. After eating, the man slowly closed the lid of the jam and put it aside. He then looked at her. A very sumptuous meal. Not bad. Feng Ling, she was about to ask if there was something wrong with this man's brain when he had already stood up, picked up his coat, and said indifferently, "Sorry for disturbing." Then he left. The door opened and closed, and the surroundings returned to silence. Finally, she was alone again. Feng Ling silently looked at the jam on the coffee table and did not move for a long time. Feng Ling was sick. All the students were surprised to learn that Coach Ling, who had never taken a leave since working in the martial arts club, was sick and even took 2 days off. They wondered if something had happened. And the real reason was that after Li Nanheng left that night, Feng Ling always felt that the room was filled with that man's smell. The kitchen, the bathroom, the sofa, the living room, she seemed to be able to feel the traces of that man's existence wherever she went, even though he did not leave anything behind. So, on that cold night, she opened all the windows in the room, trying to release the man's unique smell and the faint scent of tobacco. However, because the windows were open for too long and it was too cold outside, the edge of the bedroom window was frozen and could not be closed tightly, so the wind leaked out at night. Feng Ling's bed was facing that window, and unfortunately, she caught a cold from the cold wind that leaked in that night. The next morning, she could not even get out of bed. The world was spinning around her. She reluctantly took out her mobile phone to call the manager and the boss to ask for a day off. Then, she slept the whole day and did not wake up until the next morning. When she woke up, she did not feel like eating. She boiled some water, wrapped herself in a blanket, and sat on the sofa with a cup of hot water in her hands. She drank it in small sips and barely made it through the second day of her leave. She only asked for 1 day off, but the next day she was still sick and couldn't make it. The paper basket was full of paper towels to wipe her nose. She coughed one after another. She had never been so sick because of a cold since she was a child. She slept on the sofa for another day. That night, Feng Ling was about to go to the bathroom to take a hot bath to get rid of the illness, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. She was now very concerned about people who would suddenly knock on her door. Hearing the knock, she frowned and subconsciously didn't want to open the door. She just wanted to pretend to be dead in the room. The person outside knocked for a while but didn't hear any movement inside, so she quieted down. Just when Feng Ling was about to return to the bedroom, the phone on the bed suddenly rang. She walked over while sniffling. It turned out to be a call from Chen Beiqing. She picked up the phone in doubt. "Hello? Why don't you open the door? Aren't you sick and resting at home?" The person who knocked on the door was classmate Chen. Feng Ling paused and turned to walk out. When she opened the door, she saw Chen Beiqing standing outside, holding the phone that was talking to her. The moment he opened the door, he saw Feng Ling's slightly red nose. Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows. "Are you really sick? I thought you were hiding from me. I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough, talk about life, and find a confidant." Chapter 10:18. You think too highly of yourself. Would I not go to work just to avoid you? I'm someone who never asks for sick leave. Is there a need to do this? That's why I specifically asked the manager for your address and came over to take a look. Chen Beiqing didn't feel hurt by her direct retort. He smiled and raised a bowl of ginger soup he bought from outside. Drink some ginger soup if you have a cold. When I was in China, every time I had a bad cold, the auntie at home would force me to drink this. Although it tastes bad, it really has a good effect on colds. Feng Ling glanced at it and reached out to receive it. "All right, thank you. I'll leave the ginger soup. You can go back." Chen Beiqing didn't dare to enter her place, but he still raised his eyebrows. "What? Am I going to eat you or what? I can't beat you." A starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Even if I catch a cold, I still can't beat you. What are you afraid of? It's not that I'm afraid. I'm a coach, and you're a student. We still have to follow the etiquette, Feng Ling said calmly. Is there anything else? If there's nothing else, I'm closing. Chen Beiqing looked at her again. Have you eaten anything in the past 2 days? I ate it, Feng Ling lied. She looked sick, so he couldn't tell if she had eaten or not. But seeing that she didn't want him to go in at all, Chen Beiqing nodded. Okay, it's the first time you've accepted something from me in more than a year. Even if it's just a bowl of ginger soup I bought from a restaurant, you've already accepted it. I'll work harder and one day you'll fall in love with me. Feng Ling, you think too much, have a good rest, I'm leaving. Chen Beiqing smiled at her, waved his hand and walked to the elevator. When he entered the elevator and Feng Ling was about to close the door, she suddenly heard the door next door suddenly open. She didn't want to care about what happened next door, but she seemed to see something from the corner of her eyes. She abruptly paused and turned her eyes abruptly. Li Nanheng, who would never appear here again, was standing at the door next door. He pushed the door open with one hand and held his coat with the other. He seemed to be preparing to go out, but his gaze paused on the bowl of ginger soup in her arms. Did you catch a cold? Feng Ling looked at him in disbelief and then at the door next door. She recalled that day when he said that the next door was being renovated. There was really the sound of an electric drill drilling the wall. Feng Ling, therefore, she had never seen what her next-door neighbor looked like. She only knew that she seemed to be a very old auntie. Could it be that in just a few days, the house had changed owners? Or did Li Nanheng rent this house? Otherwise, how could he appear next door? Moreover, it was clear that he had been staying here for the past 2 days. There was only a wall between his bedroom and hers. He had never left. He was the one who hired the renovation that day. Li Nanheng walked over and Feng Ling abruptly returned to her senses. She looked straight at him. What are you doing here? What do you think I'm doing? I've been looking for someone for 2 years. I can't possibly let you disappear just like that. Li Nanheng raised his hand and took the ginger soup from her hands. Back then, I taught you the anti-investigation methods in the base. In the past 2 years, you've been using them against me. You're so good at using my spear to attack my shield. What else can I do other than guard the place closest to you? Feng Ling didn't know if it was because she had caught a cold, but her reaction was slightly slow. When she recovered from his words, the man had already entered the kitchen with the bowl of ginger soup. She rushed in, only to see that Li Nanheng had turned on the gas stove. This ginger soup isn't hot enough. Heat it up before drinking it. Why did you suddenly catch a cold? I didn't see you come out for 2 days. I thought you were on vacation. If I had known that you were sick, it wouldn't have been that brat's turn to deliver ginger soup to your doorstep. Hearing the uneasiness in the man's tone, Feng Ling suddenly realized that Li Nanheng seemed to have changed. However, she couldn't tell what had changed, nor did he seem to have changed. However, although he was domineering, he suddenly had a sense of propriety. He wouldn't force her to do anything when she didn't have any feelings for him or even when he was already married. Or rather, he had something he was afraid of. Therefore, when it came to matters regarding her, he was no longer so straightforward. Instead, he treated her carefully, afraid that if he really ignited her fire, she would disappear completely. She couldn't describe what kind of feeling this was. In any case, looking at the man who was heating up the ginger soup for her, Feng Ling raised her hand to touch her forehead. She didn't want to speak. He had already moved next door. If she still said that she wanted to chase him away, it would be a joke. At most, they were only a few meters apart. He was still next door. Crazy. She really wanted to curse. However, right now, regardless of whether it was her strength or energy, she didn't have the strength to fight with this man. She simply didn't speak and sat on the sofa. She wrapped herself in the blanket and coughed a few times. A few minutes later, the man brought out the heated ginger soup and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "Drink it." Fong Ling coughed again and raised her eyes to look at him. "The house next door, did you rent it or buy it?" "What's the difference?" "That's right. If he wanted to continue living here, whether it was renting or buying, he had his ways. After all, he was the young master of the Li family. Power and money were nothing to him. He was nothing like the ants in the world she had seen in the past 2 years. She raised the bowl to her mouth and the man reminded, "Be careful, it's hot." She paused and lowered her head to blow on the edge of the bowl. "The brat who brought you the ginger soup earlier, what's his relationship with you?" Li Nanheng stood opposite her and watched her holding the bowl and wrapped herself in the blanket. He asked with a heavy voice. As Fong Ling blew on the bowl, she lightly replied with a nasal voice, "He's my student." She didn't need to explain too much about herself. Since Li Nanheng had found her, he must have investigated the places she had worked in the past 2 years, the people she had interacted with, and everything that could be investigated. He must also be very clear about her current identity and job. "Student? A male student who specially came to deliver ginger soup to you?" The man's voice was low and cold. Fong Ling took a sip of the ginger soup and furrowed her brows. It was indeed very bad. It tasted extremely bad. It was hot and spicy, but it was undeniable that this thing could indeed make her body feel much warmer after 2 days of cold. "I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master M.O. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant." Chapter 10:19. It doesn't matter who he is. After all, he's someone who cares about me. It doesn't seem like there's a need to be antagonized by anyone. Fong Ling's tone was direct. After taking another sip, she said, "Mr. Li, although I know my words may not have any effect, I advise you to take a clear look at yourself. Don't live next door to me anymore. Los Angeles is where you should go. This is Boston. Do I need you to tell me where I should go?" The man looked as if he knew what was going on. He didn't ask any more questions about the girl who gave him the ginger soup. However, his eyes were still filled with displeasure. He glanced at the time and picked up the keys she had left on the shoe rack in front of the door. "Why are you taking my key?" Fong Ling saw the man's movements. "You don't know how to go out and buy medicine when you're this sick." "I'll go buy medicine for you." "Then why did you take my keys? What if you pretend to be dead inside and refuse to open the door for me after I buy the medicine?" The man said matter-of-factly. Fong Ling looked at him coldly. "You know I don't want to see you, but you still insist on pestering me? How come I didn't know that apart from being shameless, Mr. Li is also as hard to get rid of as sticky candy? You finally admit that you dumped me?" The man glanced back at her. Just as Fong Ling was about to flare up, he opened the door and walked out, closing the door. The door was shut without hesitation. Of course, because he had the key. However, when the door was closed, Fong Ling's expression was inexplicable. What was going on? In a relationship, shouldn't the first person to betray be the one who did the wrong thing? Why did Nanheng look as if she had dumped him? Fong Ling rolled her eyes at the door and raised the bowl in her hand to drink it up. In the end, she suddenly felt so hot and spicy that her whole body stiffened. She resisted the urge to spit it out and forced herself to swallow it. Half an hour later, the man opened the door as if he was opening his own house. Most of the apartment buildings near the Polytechnic University were slightly older. Some of them didn't have electronic room cards or fingerprint locks, so keys were needed. Hearing the movement of the keys in the man's hand, Fong Ling, who had finally finished the bowl of ginger soup, glanced at him and stood up to snatch the keys and the 2 boxes of medicine from his hand. "All right, I'll take my medicine before I sleep. You can go." Li Nanheng only raised his hand slightly, and her hand missed his. She failed to grab the keys and stumbled and almost fell into his arms. Fong Ling hurriedly took a step back and raised her eyes to look at the thing in his hand. She pursed her lips and her eyes were slightly impatient, but she could not be bothered to argue with him. The more she argued with this kind of man, the more excited he would be. She turned and walked back without looking at him. She remembered that the reason she had caught a cold was because of the man's smell in the room, which made her unable to sleep well. If she had known that he lived next door, she would have been prepared to come at any time. She had been frozen for a whole night and had fallen sick. Li Nanheng threw the keys back on the shoe rack, put the medicine on the coffee table, and poured her a glass of water. You just drank the ginger soup. Take the medicine in half an hour. Take the cold medicine and the anti-inflammatory medicine separately. If you don't remember to take it before you sleep, I'll call to remind you. You know my current phone number? Feng Ling asked subconsciously. Is it strange? The man looked at her. Feng Ling turned her head. It was not strange. He was Li Nanheng. Of course it was not strange. Seeing that she was unwilling to speak, Li Nanheng did not say more. He just walked around her room and said, You haven't been out for 2 days. How did you catch a cold? This was a very stupid and embarrassing reason, so Feng Ling did not say it. Li Nanheng had already entered her bedroom and checked the windows inside. The windows were now tightly closed and there was no air leaking in. However, the air was stuffy. He adjusted the air conditioner to a suitable temperature and looked back at the bathroom with the light on. He walked into the bathroom. Perhaps he did not think of anything, but he subconsciously glanced at the drying rack above. The 2 sets of cute underwear that had been hanging there had been put away. It was empty. Li Nanheng suddenly wanted to laugh at himself. He actually felt a little regretful. After checking that there was no other place in her room that could easily be exposed to the wind or cold, Li Nanheng did not force her to stay for long. Before leaving, he only told her to remember to take the medicine. When he returned to the next door, the man casually took out a bunch of keys from his pocket and put them on the shelf. He looked back at the things on the shelf, sighed, and shook his head with a smile. Her anti-detection ability was indeed not bad, but she still lacked some life experience. She didn't know that she could get another key at any time. Fortunately, she had always hidden it well. Otherwise, if there really were a lot of men who had bad intentions towards her, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to guard against them. She wouldn't even know how her house was emptied. After all, she was still the Feng Ling who did not understand many things in the base but had a cold temperament. No matter what a person did, their nature would not change. Late at night. Feng Ling had slept at home for 2 days. After drinking the ginger soup, she felt hot all over and took the medicine. She remembered to take the anti-inflammatory medicine before going to bed. She was about to go to bed when her phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the caller ID. It was Los Angeles. Without thinking, she knew it was the man next door. She did not answer it but hung up and went to take the medicine. After taking the medicine, she turned off the light and went to sleep. After turning off the light and lying on the bed, she turned to look out the window and saw the light next door. Did this man like living next door so much? Back then, he used this trick to force her to stay next door, causing their daily lives to be inseparable. Now he was playing the same trick again. A married man. How shameless did he have to be to think that he could use the same trick to trap her heart again and again? Feng Ling retracted her cold gaze and closed her eyes, clearing the man who should no longer exist in her world from her mind. Li Nanheng saw that the light on her side was turned off and glanced at the phone that had been ruthlessly hung up. He put down the phone, opened the window of the balcony, and walked out. The place she lived was very quiet. At 11:00 in the night, not a sound could be heard. The man lit a cigarette, and there was a flickering spark between his fingers. He casually leaned against the balcony and puffed out a cloud of smoke into the night sky outside. He then turned his face to look at the tightly shut window next door and the dark room with the lights turned off. I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master M.O. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant. Chapter 10:20. 5th door was opened and closed. The door opened and closed. With Feng Ling's usual vigilance, she would be able to hear what was going on and would wake up. But her body was cold and hot, and she was powerless. She felt as if someone had come in, but she also felt like she was dreaming. In the dream, she seemed to have a slight fever. Someone's hand was placed on her forehead, and not long after, an ice-cold towel was placed on her forehead. She didn't know how long she had been in this dream. She was half asleep and half awake. When she finally woke up again, it was already 9:20 am. She had asked for 2 days off. She had taken the first 2 days off, but she couldn't do it today. She had to attend a class today because several students who had just studied in the martial arts club for half a year were going to participate in a competition at school. School competitions paid more attention to specifications and forms, unlike real international competitions that required full strength. However, because they needed sufficient forms, they needed a qualified rehearsal and some forms and movements. She had to arrange them well today. Feng Ling sat up from the bed, took a look at the time, raised her hand to rub her still dizzy and swollen forehead, and got up to wash. When she saw the towel folded there in the bathroom, she was puzzled. She usually hung the towel there. Why was it folded here? She reached out to pick it up and found that the towel was still a little wet. She suddenly thought of the dream last night. She had a fever and someone came to take care of her. Was it Li Nanheng? Feng Ling turned and walked out of the bedroom. She walked around all the rooms in the small house and didn't see anyone else. She remembered that he left before going to bed last night and didn't come again. She had closed the door and he had returned the key. How could he come here? She put it here after taking a shower last night. But it couldn't be folded here, and it couldn't be dry now. She suddenly turned her eyes to the small balcony outside the window. The balcony on the 15th floor was different from the 2 adjacent balconies in 11 base. The width and distance between them couldn't be crossed easily. This was a matter of life and death. No matter what, Li Nanheng couldn't be so irrational. Then this towel, was it a dream or something? She didn't have much time to think. She quickly changed her clothes and went out. She hadn't recovered from the cold and couldn't drive. She didn't want to be a road killer, so she called a taxi and went to the martial arts club. Classes usually started at 10 am, but she was still 15 minutes late. Fortunately, she had called her boss and manager before 10 am to say that she would be there soon, so the students were all waiting for her. After arriving, Feng Ling did not explain her illness. She changed into her usual clothes and entered the classroom. The students were very excited to see her, but they found that Coach Ling, who usually wouldn't sit down for a rest for several hours, had to drink some hot water every 10 minutes or so today, and she had to sit down for a while. Her voice was a little hoarse, and she didn't look very well. There seemed to be some sweat on her forehead. Coach Ling, are you still ill? Did you catch a cold that bad? A few students saw that she was in a bad state and couldn't help but say a few words of concern. I'm fine. It's just a small cold. You guys continue to practice. Feng Ling stood up and walked over. Remember the posture of your hands and legs. Since you're all international students from China and want to show Asian culture and Chinese martial arts in front of students from all over the world, you've just learned for half a year, so you don't need to learn anything too profound for the time being. Just remember to do every movement correctly. With the classical rhythm of the Chinese style, it will definitely be very shocking. Continue to practice. The time before 12 noon today is all yours. If you can't do it, continue in the afternoon. Practice until you pass. But you look very tired. I'm fine. I'll sit for a while when I'm too tired. Feng Ling walked to one of the male students and reached out to straighten his arm. Raise it, straighten it, and lay it flat. Raise it like this, right? Coach Ling, your hands are very hot. Do you have a fever? The male student looked at her worriedly. Looking at her from such a close distance, he could clearly see that her lips were pale, and her hands were indeed abnormally hot. Feng Ling withdrew her hand and did not say much. She just turned and walked back, saying as she walked, "Why are you all looking at me? Continue to practice." Seeing that she insisted, they had no choice but to continue practicing. Coach Ling's temper was not something they could handle. Although she was younger than them, her temper was not something they could handle, so they continued to practice. Just after an hour of Feng Ling's class, the door of the martial arts classroom was suddenly pushed open with great force. The head coach and the boss of the martial arts club outside were both shocked and obviously failed to stop him. Looking at the tall man who walked in quickly, they looked at Feng Ling, who was sitting in front of the classroom and drinking water with some embarrassment. "Ah, Ling, this gentleman said he came to see you. We said you were in class and it was not convenient for you to see him, but he was very angry and said that you haven't recovered and still have a fever. We actually failed to stop him," they said. Actually. Who would have thought that Feng Ling's martial arts skills were amazing? It was really a waste of a talent like her to be a coach in their martial arts club, but they didn't expect that this gentleman seemed to be even better than Feng Ling. The head coach originally wanted to stop him, but he was kicked away and almost lost his life. Men always showed their true abilities, especially those who had learned martial arts since childhood. When they saw someone who was more powerful than them, even if they were not convinced, even if they didn't know what was going on in front of them, they still had some instinctive respect in their hearts and were more curious about who this gentleman was. He didn't seem to show his strength, but he was actually so powerful. Feng Ling. Li Nanheng's voice was unusually anxious. "Come out and go back with me." Go back? Feng Ling didn't feel that her name was called here. Anyway, it was the same way. She just had an extra surname, a surname that she didn't want to touch anymore. She didn't look up, just looked at the cup of hot water in front of her as if it could bloom flowers, and took another sip of water. "Come out with me first. Don't you know you have a fever?" "I know. I don't do anything here. At most, I just watch my students practice various movements here. I don't need to go on the field to perform. The fever won't kill me, so I don't need to continue to ask for leave." She put down the cup in her hand. "I'm here to teach and work for others. Otherwise, the boss will give me so much money for nothing. There's no need to ask for leave all the time." Chapter 10:21. Feng Ling pulled out the chair next to her and sat on a slightly more comfortable chair. "Boss, head coach, please send the irrelevant people out. Why are the others still in a daze? Continue practicing." Before he could finish his words, Zhang Xian grabbed his wrist. That person strode in from outside the door and grabbed her tightly, not backing down at all. "Coach Ling, I have something to tell you." He didn't call her by her name again. Instead, he gave her respect and called her by her current title. He was so strong that she couldn't even pull her hand back. "Can't you see that I'm in class? Mr. Li, are you always like this? Your matters are always the most important. You have to get what you want, and you have to get the feelings you want. If you want others to wait for you for 3 years, they have to wait for you. No matter how unwilling or wrong they are, they have to listen to your wishes first. Others have to surround you for everything. You're the young master of the Li family, and I'm an orphan with no parents and no one to rely on, so I have to be bullied by you inside and out. After I get out of the place that belongs to you, do I have to continue to be tortured by you?" Li Nanheng paused and let go. When her black and white eyes were fixed on his, he saw the coldness and wariness in her eyes, as well as the red blood vessels that appeared due to the cold and fever that had yet to subside. Other than the time when he had forced her to point her gun at him because he had kissed her forcefully and bullied her, she had never looked at him like this before. But it was this look that made Li Nanheng's heart, which had been in pain for 2 years, feel as if even the last drop of blood was about to be drained. The man wanted to say something, but he looked at her, who had been sitting on the chair coldly, and finally said, "I'll wait for you outside." He turned around and walked out directly under the puzzled gazes of the martial arts club owner and the head coach. He even closed the door of the classroom. Under Feng Ling's cold instructions, the students who thought they were watching some love and hate drama hurriedly continued to practice, lest they provoked the cold-faced female coach who seemed to be in a bad mood. However, they could not help but occasionally look in Feng Ling's direction. So her name is Feng Ling. Which 0 is still the number 0? Or which 0 is a bell or a dewy sense of inspiration? It doesn't seem to match her style. Under the curious gazes of a group of people, the cup in Feng Ling's hand suddenly spilled on the ground. The full cup of water fell by her feet and splashed the edge of her trousers, but clearly she did not notice it herself. She still sat there expressionlessly, and her eyes were also indifferent. "What are you looking at?" Feng Ling looked at them expressionlessly. A group of male students thought absent-mindedly. The water in the cup seemed to be very hot. Did she not feel hot at all? Who was that man just now? For so long, they often discussed in private what kind of man could subdue a woman like Coach Ling. It seemed that Chen Beiqing, a rich young master, couldn't suppress her at all. But obviously, the man who just entered the door made them feel that Coach Ling was inferior in all aspects and aura. She raised her eyes to look at the short-haired woman sitting in front of her. She calmly picked up the glass of water from the ground and gently placed it to the side. "If you keep looking at me, I'm going to dismiss the class. Don't come crying to me if you make a fool of yourself in front of all the students in the world." Li Nanheng looked at the time. Time passed by, and Feng Ling still hadn't dismissed the class. He knew how serious she was about everything. She was still the same as before, but the nature of her work was different. But this morning, she still had a high fever of 39 degrees. He stayed by her bed for several hours and fed her antipyretics, but it was obviously not effective. In the morning, he went out to buy her some breakfast, but when he came back, he found that this woman had gone to work. Thinking of the high temperature he felt when he held her wrist just now, the man felt that every minute and second in this room was torture. He opened the door outside, ignoring the owner of the martial arts club and the head coach beside him, intending to go out for some fresh air. The sound of the door closing was deafening. After hearing the sound of the door closing, Feng Ling finally withdrew from her cold and expressionless state and said to the male students who were practicing, "Practice for another half an hour and then rest. At 1 p.m., I'll check again. After confirming that there are no problems, we can end it. You guys continue. I'm going to the bathroom." She got up and walked out of the classroom. She saw the empty reception room and the head coach and boss who were looking at her curiously in front of the office door. She paused for a moment and did not say anything. She looked straight ahead and walked in the direction of the restroom. Feng Ling didn't go to the bathroom. She turned on the faucet and washed her face. The weather was cold, and the water was also very cold. Most of the people in the martial arts club were air-conditioned, so the water in the pipe was not warm at all. It was as cold as the first frost and snow. She splashed some water on her face, and the biting chill made her shiver all over. Looking up at the mirror, she saw herself wet. In the narrow space with plenty of light, her pale face had nowhere to hide. Because she was running a fever, there was a very light blush on her cheeks that didn't look particularly normal. If one didn't look closely, they wouldn't be able to see it, but looking at the mirror at such a close distance, they could still see it. She raised her hand and touched her forehead. Then, she looked at her hand. Her fingers were white and tender, but there was a thin callus on her palm from holding a gun all year round. Although it was not obvious, it remained in her palm. Just like herself, after she stopped pretending to be a man, everyone who saw her said she was very beautiful and asked her why she cut her hair so short and cut off the last bit of femininity. She just smiled faintly and did not answer. Her hair, her life, just like her hands, looked beautiful to others, but no one knew that she had a thin callus in it that could never be wiped off. As she looked at the mirror, a drop of water rolled onto her palm. She thought she was crying, so she raised her head to look at the woman in the mirror. Her eyes were dry, and other than a little bloodshot, there was no moisture at all. She didn't cry when she was kicked out of 11 base. She didn't cry when she learned that Lee Nanhung was married. Of course, she wouldn't cry now. In fact, she was a little surprised by her indifference. Why didn't she even shed a tear when she couldn't stand the pain? Fong Ling never thought of herself as a strong person. She only felt that she was a child who grew up drinking wolf's milk and was born with a heart of stone. She shouldn't have feelings. Chapter 10:22. But at this moment, she watched as the head of 11 base, the prestigious young master of the Lee family, stayed in Boston because of her. Because of her, he disregarded his status and image and stepped into such a martial arts club. Thinking of the way the man looked at her just now, her emotions came so suddenly. She suddenly felt that humans were really animals that were easily dominated by emotions. People who shouldn't have feelings shouldn't have so many burdens. He's married, isn't he? Back then, she had never thought of being stubborn, let alone now that he had been married for 2 years. The sound of running water under the tap seemed to cover up the ripples in her heart. Everything was still calm on the surface. She had been peacefully in class for nearly 2 hours, but at this moment, those words suddenly came to her mind. Every single word was drilled into his ears. Fong Ling is young. In fact, it's just a fruitless relationship. Even if she knows about this, she will be sad for a few days. Fong Ling, this kind of unknown orphan, compared to the eldest daughter of the Fong family, as long as one isn't stupid, they would know who to choose. Nowadays, which man would remain faithful to a woman until death? Liking someone doesn't mean he has to take responsibility. A silly girl like Fong Ling isn't suitable for him. People who don't belong to the same world shouldn't force their way in. She should get into a relationship while she's still young. When she grows up, she'll understand not to trust men so easily. This was the ending of the first love in her life. Han Jin was right. Lee Nanhung had just given her a lesson. She had gotten what she should have gotten and lost what she should have lost. That included the first time that he had no memory of. She reeks of alcohol and can't even arrive on time for training. It's obvious that she had a hangover for an entire night. You say that she adheres to the rules of the base and that her character is worthy of being tested? We're already being polite enough not to have someone strip you naked. Do you think you can still stay in 11 base? They ridiculed her for being a woman, for disguising herself as a man in the base, for living a disorderly life among men, for being an orphan without any parental discipline, and for easily trusting the feelings of others. She had always thought that Lee Nanhung was different. She thought that this man, who could be cold to the bones to others but doted on her to the bones, treated her differently. She thought that he was sincere enough and that he could see the good in her. Fong Ling placed her hand on the ice-cold pool and tossed and turned. She thought about all the questions that she had never thought about 2 years ago. She thought that he was different. But the truth was that he was more ruthless than any of them. There wasn't even an explanation. The old man of the Lee family made her embarrass herself in front of everyone in the base and drove her away. It was said that Lee Nanhung had been looking for her for 2 years, but today she saw clearly that this man was no different from 2 years ago. When she had a fever this morning, he had indeed entered her home. She didn't even know how he made a copy of her key. If she wanted to fight with this man, she always seemed to be too immature and silly. His family background gave him enough confidence to do whatever he wanted. Even if he knew that she was indifferent to him, he could still find ways to sneak into her life. He was an arrogant man who trampled on her heart and her self-esteem. Whether it was to help her, protect her, or hurt her, he just treated her as an ant and easily wanted to control her heart and her life. It had been 2 years. She had long said goodbye to those past lives. She wanted to stay far away from him. The farther away from him, the better. Fong Ling held the cold pool with force, and her fingertips turned white. They were neither relatives nor friends. They just had a relationship that came and went like the wind. They had written a thick brush stroke in the past of their youth. What was there to affect their mood? She closed her eyes. The next second, scattered scenes appeared out of thin air. She fell into a man's bathtub in the sauna room of the orphanage and fought with him. When she first entered the base, she had a written test with a man on the training ground. Her moves were fierce, which made him feel that something was wrong, but he let her go and didn't investigate further. When she was on a mission, he suddenly appeared and helped her solve the problem behind her. When she fell into the sea on the cruise ship, he was on the other side of the more dangerous terrorist enemy zone. When she was lost on the island, his helicopter suddenly appeared. The mission in the bar, she was dressed as a woman, he pressed her against the wall and kissed her, he blocked bullets for her, he did everything for her. They were together on Roger's Pass day and night. When she killed the commander in the military, he protected her behind him and helped her solve problems again and again. When she was almost killed by the snake, he appeared again and left a small cross scar on her shoulder. He said that she was only 17 years old and was still too young. He asked her to wait for him for 3 years. 3 years later, he would marry her. Fong Ling opened her eyes, looked at herself in the mirror, and pushed back the wet hair and fringe on her forehead. The woman's delicate and white face still looked a little handsome because of this action, but the fringe immediately fell down again. Even though her hair was short, she still looked like a young girl. She could never be a real man. Just like how she would never be able to accept a man who was already married. This was a problem that could never be solved in the world. That's it, Fong Ling. He's not worth you thinking about any longer. For the rest of the time, Fong Ling went back to class as if nothing had happened. When it was time for the lunch break, the male students came up one by one to help her back to the office to rest, but she refused. Coach Ling, your name is Fong Ling? Which 0? Someone asked her. Fong Ling didn't answer but just glanced at him coldly, and the other party left dejectedly. She was about to go back to the office, but the head coach was waiting for her in the office. Why didn't you call me to tell me that you're not feeling well after class? Today's classes are just basic lessons. I'll help you look after them. The head coach looked into her eyes. By the way, that man is still outside. Fong Ling nodded and didn't say much. Obviously, she didn't want to go out to see him. Seeing her sitting back at the desk calmly, the head coach asked again, "Who is this man? Did you know him before?" She was silent for a moment. No matter who he is, you never care about these things. Why did you suddenly ask me today? Because a kid like Chen Beiqing is no match for me. Although the person who came today didn't say much, I felt a clear sense of crisis. At first, Fong Ling didn't understand. After a moment, she looked in surprise at the head coach who was standing in front of the office door with a serious expression. At the same time, she saw the man behind him approaching. Chapter 10:23. Seeing the man approaching, Fong Ling didn't speak anymore, but the head coach's words still startled her. For more than a year, the manager had been taking care of her like an elder. Furthermore, he seemed to be 31 or 32 years old. She had always regarded him as a mentor and helpful friend. She had never thought that he would have other thoughts about her. How could a woman like her, who didn't even have any femininity, be worthy of a man's love? Just her fists alone? The manager sensed the slightly cold gaze behind him. His gaze paused for a moment before he abruptly turned to look at the tall man approaching from behind. Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and held a box of antipyretics that he had just bought from the pharmacy next to the martial arts club. He looked at him coldly and stared straight into his eyes. If you can sense the crisis, it means that you are a smart person. Head coach, you can go back to work first. Fong Ling didn't want the past between her and Li Nanheng to affect others, nor did she want those things to be heard by others. The head coach stood in front of the door without moving. Instead, he looked straight into Li Nanheng's eyes. At the same time, when Li Nanheng was about to enter the door, he suddenly raised his hand and blocked the man's footsteps with one arm. Li Nanheng didn't speak. He glanced at the arm in front of him and then raised his eyebrows to look at him. He didn't speak and even suddenly smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Even Feng Ling, who was sitting behind the desk not far away, vaguely felt a sense of cold danger. Ah Ling is a member of our martial arts club. No matter what your relationship with her is, if she doesn't want to see you and doesn't intend to have anything to do with you, everyone here has the responsibility and obligation to protect her. Sir, I think Ah Ling obviously doesn't want to see you. The head coach also looked fearlessly at the man who was taller than him, a person who practiced martial arts all year round. His eyes were firm. Which eye of yours saw that she didn't want to see me? Li Nanheng was indifferent. Feng Ling originally wanted to say, I really don't want to see you, but at the same time, she felt that if she said this, the head coach would definitely be angry, so she did not speak, but just stood up and walked over. Just as she reached the door, the head coach suddenly turned around and stood in front of her, shielding her behind him as he said, It's okay, I'm here. Feng Ling looked at the tall man in front of her. When she met Li Nanheng's cold gaze, she suddenly glanced at the medicine in his hand. Li Nanheng didn't say much. He just looked at her and handed the medicine box to her. Take the medicine first. The head coach did not speak. He looked at him and then turned back to look at Feng Ling. My fever is not serious anymore. Feng Ling said lightly, I don't need to take medicine. I've been drinking as much water as possible, so it won't be a big problem. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Li, but your concern is really misplaced. You should be concerned about your wife, not me. Hearing this, the head coach didn't know Li Nanheng's identity. Hearing this, his gaze instantly changed and he stared coldly at the man in front of him. Married? Li Nanheng completely ignored the person in front of him and only looked at Feng Ling indifferently. I asked you to take the medicine. Are you reminding yourself or someone else? Feng Ling didn't want to talk to him anymore, so she simply took the medicine and said, Head coach, you go ahead. I'll talk to him alone. Thank you. The head coach was unhappy because this man was married, but hearing Feng Ling's cold and polite voice, he hesitated and simply gave Li Nanheng a warning look. Regardless of whether Li Nanheng paid attention to his gaze or not, he said in a low voice, I'm in the office next door. Call me anytime. Feng Ling didn't speak. When the head coach left, she raised her hand to Li Nanheng. Give me the key. Li Nanheng's cold brows moved. Because the man in the way had left, the coldness in his eyes dissipated a lot. He looked at her in front of the door. What key? Li Nanheng, don't play dumb with me. When I was still sleeping in the early morning, did you enter my house again? When you took the key out last night, did you directly duplicate the key? Feng Ling looked at him coldly. Give me the key. He didn't expect that although this little woman didn't have much life experience, she was clearly not as easy to fool as before. After all, she had lived outside for 2 years. These 2 years were 2 years that he couldn't fully control and only belonged to her. Li Nanheng smiled. But I made more than one copy. Can you be sure that if I give you a key now, I won't have a second copy in my hand? Feng Ling, then give me both. What if I made 10 copies yesterday? Or more? Li Nanheng, what do you want? Feng Ling suddenly put down her hand, her eyes impatient. It's not good for you to pester me like this. You're sick. You had a fever in the early morning. I went to take care of you. Is this pestering? I know you're seriously ill, but you still ran out to work. I told you to go back. Is this pestering? The man took a step forward, stood in front of her, and looked down at her. If caring for you is pestering, then what about that thing just now? Who is the so-called student who sent you the ginger soup? I don't allow you to go to work when you're sick. Is this pestering? Feng Ling didn't want to argue with him. She just frowned and said, I have to work in the afternoon. I don't have the energy to talk nonsense with you here. I'm warning you, bring me the keys before I go home tonight. Don't casually enter my house again. With that, Feng Ling took the medicine and turned away. She did not look at him again. She returned to the desk and said before sitting down, "This martial arts club is my area. Please don't come here again, Mr. Li." Li Nanheng stood there without moving. Feng Ling sat behind the desk and looked up at him. "Why aren't you leaving?" Li Nanheng was silent for a moment. He walked in, pulled out a chair in front of the desk, and sat down. Seeing that he didn't speak but just sat there, Feng Ling looked at him in confusion. "I'm watching you take the medicine." The man glanced at the glass of water in front of her. Feng Ling was silent for a moment, opened the medicine box impatiently, took out 2 pills, and was about to swallow them when the man's voice came again. "Don't you know how to take the medicine before taking it? Just 1 is enough." Feng Ling paused. She did not look at the man but looked down at the instructions written on the medicine box. As he said, she only took 1 pill at a time. It was not good for the body if the medicine was too much. She pursed her lips, put a pill into her mouth, picked up the water, took 2 sips, and put it down. "All right, can I go?" She looked at Li Nanheng. Read the latest chapter of Love is Not Comparable to Your Claw Book House for free. Chapter 1024. Li Nanheng didn't move. He just crossed his straight, slender, and strong legs, casually leaned against the back of the chair behind him, and looked at her indifferently. "How long have you been in this martial arts club?" Feng Ling slowly drank the water in her hand and said disapprovingly, "Haven't you already investigated? Is there anything else you don't know? Do you need to ask me? I really don't know how long you work here." The man didn't hide it. He was still calm under her half-mocking tone. "1.5 years, Feng Ling said indifferently and took another sip of water. 1.5 years? You have been working in such a small martial arts club for so long, which means that your words and your existence have a certain influence in this martial arts club. For example, if you want to recruit an intern coach or assistant, you should be able to decide by yourself, right?" Feng Ling was surprised. She abruptly raised her eyes to look at the man sitting there with his legs crossed like a young master. "What do you mean? I'm not in charge of 11 base recently. Feng is doing it for me. I'm basically semi-unemployed now." Li Nanheng raised his handsome eyebrows as he spoke. "How about staying as your assistant? Coach Ling, please take me in." Feng Ling, no matter how high Feng Ling's guard was, she was still caught off guard by his words. 11 base was not under his management for the time being. He was half unemployed and wanted to be an assistant. Was he asking for shelter? His words seemed to contain several layers of meaning, but she didn't understand. For a moment, she held the cup of water and didn't say anything. She just looked at him strangely. Li Nanheng could tell at a glance that her inexperienced little head couldn't understand this. He put down his legs, sat on the chair, leaned close to her desk, put one hand on her desk, and raised his eyebrows at her. "Isn't this place just teaching close-range combat? You learned all these things from me. I should be qualified to be an assistant coach, huh?" Feng Ling still couldn't react. She stared at him for a long time before putting down the cup with a cold expression. The cup made a crisp sound when it hit the table. "This is not a place for you to mess around, Mr. Li. Please respect my work. I'm asking you to take me in." "How is that disrespectful?" Feng Ling frowned. "You're the boss of 11 base. Why are you here as a coach?" Li Nanheng smiled. "You are an excellent sniper from 11 base and the champion of the women's team in close combat. Why are you working as a coach here?" "I was desperate. I had to find a job that suited me. Do you think everyone is like you? Even if you don't have 11 base, you have the Li family behind you. Even if you don't have the Li family, you have Dr. Qin and Mr. Mo behind you." Li Nanheng's expression did not change, but he still faintly smiled. It seemed that although this little girl usually did not show anything on the surface, in fact, she knew many things very well in her heart. She could even see his frequent contacts with Mo Jingshan and the underground arms business, but she probably didn't know what kind of business he was doing. She only knew that he didn't lack anything. Li Nanheng continued the previous topic. I'm also desperate now. The elders of the Li family were angered by me. They drove me out of the base and wanted to sever ties with me. Now I'm also a poor person. No one wants me. I just don't know if Coach Ling will take me in. Feng Ling was puzzled. Hasn't 11 base been handed over to you long ago? Apart from using their status as elders to suppress your arrogance, how could they have the ability to drive you out of 11 base? Li Nanheng didn't explain but just looked at her. Don't talk nonsense. We've known each other for so long. You and I don't talk nonsense. Just tell me, do you accept me or not? Feng Ling's eyes were not shaken at all. No. You're so busy every day. Don't you need an assistant or something? Yes. Feng Ling looked at him calmly. But what I need is an assistant, not you. I don't seem to meet the requirements. Why don't I meet the requirements? You don't meet any requirements. For example, which point? Feng Ling's patience was almost at the limit. Why didn't she find that Li Nanheng was such a troublemaker before? Knowing that it was impossible, he still came to challenge her bottom line? You don't meet any requirements at all. If I have to point out one point, all the staff of our martial arts club are unmarried. It's enough that you are married. Our boss said that people who are married and have families are not suitable for this kind of work that focuses on martial arts too frequently, because they can't work too hard. If they get hurt or suffer a little, they will be blamed by their families. They are too burdensome. Well, then I should be standing in the range of the standard. I'm not married to anyone. Li Nanheng looked straight at her. Feng Ling frowned and her eyes suddenly became much colder. Li Nanheng, shameless as you are, it doesn't mean that you can lie to get in here. Even if you don't like Feng Mingzhu, she is still your wife. Don't you think it's shameless for you to ignore her existence and hook up with others? I'll say it for the last time. I didn't marry Feng Mingzhu, and I didn't marry anyone. I didn't marry anyone, understand? Li Nanheng's hand was still on the table in front of her, and he looked straight at her. Even if I die now, no so-called wife will come out to settle the score. Of course, if you are willing to become my wife and play the role of finding trouble for others for me, I will be very happy. Feng Ling coldly looked at him. You didn't marry anyone? Are you trying to say that the major mainstream media in Los Angeles 2 years ago are fake? Li Nanheng. Give me another year. When the time is up, you will know everything you should know. I don't want to know. Feng Ling directly interrupted him. I am not a 3-year-old child. I am not so easy to deceive. I like you and love you. That's why I coax you like a 3-year-old child. Li Nanheng's patience was surprisingly good. I don't like you or love you. I'm afraid you can't even see my face. Such an obvious difference in treatment, can't you feel it, or are you deliberately pretending that your eyes are not good? Feng Ling's expression did not change. Whether you're married or not, it has nothing to do with me. Li Nanheng, in my world, if something ends, it's over. No matter if it's because of a misunderstanding, the truth, or being forced to leave, or whatever, there's no point in looking back. Right now, I'm sitting here talking to you instead of angrily asking someone to chase you out. This shows that I'm very calm, so please leave calmly, okay? Baidu read the latest chapter of The Warm Wind is Not as Good as Your Love Claw Book House for free. Chapter 1025. Li Nanheng smiled faintly and said lightly, Isn't the reason why you didn't ask someone to drive me out because you were afraid that they would be hurt? Feng Ling, what are you trying to do? I'm waiting for you to take me in. Do you need me to take someone like you in? Even if I take you in, the result will be the same. There's no possibility between us. Feng Ling had already made her words clear enough. Li Nanheng nodded seriously. Then I'll just take you in. I won't seduce you. I'll be your assistant obediently. How about that? Fong Ling, written on the man's forehead were the words, trap. She raised her hand to her forehead and closed her eyes. Finally, she took out a business card from the drawer and threw it in front of him with no expression on her face. I won't accept it even if you say it until you die. If you want to humiliate yourself like this, the KTV next door is recruiting waiters. I think you meet their standards in all aspects. Li Nanheng sat there without moving. Looking at the business card she threw in front of him, he glanced at her with a puzzled expression. Fong Ling explained to him, this is the phone number of the KTV boss. Li Nand glanced at her with a hint of danger in his eyes. Fong Ling didn't want to talk to him anymore. She stood up and brushed past him with a cold expression. She turned and entered the classroom without looking back. At 4 p.m., Chen Beiqing would come to class at this time. In order to avoid Li Nanheng, Fong Ling did not leave the classroom for the entire afternoon. She was too lazy to ask him if he had left or not. Anyway, she did not have much strength right now, so she simply sat in the classroom and waited for the next class to come. When Chen Beiqing walked into the classroom, he saw that Fong Ling had just handed the empty cup in her hand to a student and asked him to fetch a cup of hot water for her. He took a few glances outside and walked in. You haven't recovered yet, and you're already coming to work? Fong Ling glanced at him and did not respond. When the student brought the cup back to her, she thanked him and put it aside. Chen Beiqing came over and was about to touch her forehead when she looked away and glanced at him. What are you doing? Chen Beiqing's hand paused in the air. Realizing that her cold and hard temper made her very resistant to being touched by him, he had to put down his hand. I want to see if you have a fever because you look very pale. It's just a cold, it's not that serious. In a while, you'll be on time for class. You're all very familiar with your movements. Just do as I say. Fong Ling said and glanced outside. Seeing that other students had arrived one after another, she didn't say anything, but when Chen Beiqing was about to go to class, Fong Ling remembered the bowl of ginger soup he specially sent to her. She seemed to be too cold, so she added, "Thank you for the bowl of ginger soup." This was probably the first time he had heard her take the initiative to speak to him since he had pursued her for so long, and it was also the first time he heard her not speak so coldly. Chen Beiqing looked back at her, smiled, and was about to speak, when he heard the second half of Fong Ling's words. But please don't go to my house anymore. I don't like other people to disturb my home, and I don't like strangers to touch my private life too closely. Chen Beiqing looked at her for a while and suddenly stood still. His hands hung by his sides. After a moment, he licked the left side of his cheek, turned around, and pressed his hands against the wall behind her. Fong Ling was still sitting there against the wall. She was caught off guard by his sudden action, and when she came to her senses, she had been trapped by Chen Beiqing, whom she had always regarded as a student. Her eyes paused and then turned cold. What are you doing? Class is about to begin. Don't be like this. What's wrong with me? I've pursued you for so long, but I haven't even received a smile from you. You caught a cold, and I wanted to go to your address and send you a bowl of ginger soup, but you didn't let me in and instead, I received your disgust. Tell me, what should I do? Although the man in front of her was only in his early 20s and was just an international student, his gentleness was mixed with some displeasure and indignation at this moment. He bent down and looked at her closely, staring straight into her cold eyes. Back then, you suddenly appeared in front of me in the parking lot and jumped into my world. I couldn't control my growing love for you, but I also tried my best to pursue you slowly and not to annoy you. Why? It's just a bowl of ginger soup. Are you afraid that someone will intrude into your life too forcefully, or are you resisting something? I feel that what you're resisting is not just me, but you completely trapped yourself in a very narrow corner and refused anyone to approach your heart. Have you ever been hurt? Can't you say it out? Do you have to hold it in like this? Fong Ling didn't expect that the man who had always been gentle and polite to her, and even if she didn't accept the flowers, would suddenly turn around. It really gave her a fright. At the same time, before she recovered from the shock and had time to push him away, the door of the classroom suddenly opened again. "Ah, Ling, this Mr. Li." The boss entered the door with a fawning expression. He originally wanted to discuss something with Feng Ling, but the moment he entered, he saw this scene. His eyebrows twitched and he choked on his words. The man who came in behind the boss of the martial arts club was tall and straight. He had changed into the coach's martial arts club uniform like Feng Ling's. His cold eyes became even colder when he saw the scene inside, and he stared coldly at the woman who was almost imprisoned against the wall by force. As soon as she met Li Nanheng's eyes, Feng Ling was startled. When she saw the clothes he was wearing, she seemed to understand something and stared at the boss. "Boss, you," the boss of the martial arts club said awkwardly and fawningly, "I think you work too hard. You're so tired that you're sick. I've been planning to find an assistant for you. It happens that Mr. Li is good at martial arts and volunteered to be an assistant coach. Let him follow you from now on." Apply? Did Li Nanheng need to apply? The purpose of running a martial arts club was to make money. She didn't know how much money Li Nanheng had spent to make the boss look so embarrassed. He knew that she would definitely not agree, but he still brought this bastard in. Feng Ling was about to speak with a cold face, when her chin was suddenly pinched by Chen Beiqing and turned around. Read the latest chapter of Love Claw Bookhouse Can't Match Your Warmth for free. Chapter 1026. She froze for a moment, then turned her gaze back to Chen Beiqing, who still hadn't let go of her. The air in front of the door almost froze at this moment. "Speak. In the future, don't suddenly change the topic or look at someone else when I'm talking to you. I'm not only your student here, but I'm also a man who likes you." Chen Beiqing looked at her seriously and said word by word. His words were clearly heard by her, as well as by the boss and the man behind him. The boss was dumbfounded. "Student Chen, what are you doing? Coach Ling is like half a teacher to you." "You," Chen Beiqing didn't even look back. He still held Feng Ling's chin with his hand and said firmly, "A teacher 3 years younger than me? What? What era was it now? It's just a teacher-student relationship in the martial arts club. Can't I like him?" The boss choked. Of course, it was not that he couldn't like her, but everyone knew Coach Ling's temper. In order to keep Ling, no matter how difficult it was to deal with her, he, as the boss, would try his best to tolerate her. Now it was already very risky to bring Mr. Li in as an assistant, and she obviously didn't want to accept it. Now student Chen was putting himself at risk. If Ling couldn't accept it and resigned, then the martial arts club would suffer the biggest loss. The boss hesitated for a moment. Seeing that Coach Ling was restrained by Chen Xiaobei against the wall, and that she seemed to be weak and uncomfortable, she couldn't get rid of Chen Xiaobei. Even her struggle was easily restrained by Chen Xiaobei. The boss couldn't stand it anymore. He was about to go over to help, but before he could, Chen Xiaobei had already walked over. "Let go of me first." Feng Ling glanced at the man who was approaching her coldly and immediately frowned. She looked at Chen Beiqing, who seemed to want an explanation from her. "Let go of me, do you hear me? I've been very patient. It's been more than a year. What else do you want me to do?" Chen Beiqing looked down at her. Suddenly, he felt a weight on his shoulder, followed by a faint stabbing pain. He subconsciously turned his eyes to look at the tall man behind him. Before he could see the other person's face clearly, he felt the man's hand on his shoulder. It didn't seem to be doing much, but it was slowly pressing down, causing waves of pain and numbness to spread through his entire arm. When he saw the person behind him clearly, he only saw that there was no extra expression on the cold face. It seemed like the wind was blowing and the clouds were calm, but it made people feel an inexplicable chill down their spines. "She wants you to get lost. Don't you understand?" Li Nanheng held his shoulder and easily dragged him to the side. Chen Beiqing had only learned some simple self-defense skills in the martial arts club. In front of people like Li Nanheng, his kung fu was nothing, but at least he studied hard and had a good foundation. When he was thrown away, he didn't look too embarrassed. He just took 2 steps back and looked at Li Nanheng in surprise and coldly. "What are you doing?" Chen Beiqing's eyes, which had always been gentle, were filled with anger and determination because of his unhappiness just now, but because of Li Nanheng's push, he became sober. Li Nanheng's expression remained unchanged. He glanced indifferently at Feng Ling, who was still sitting there with pale lips, and then shifted his indifferent gaze to the boy who was not afraid of death. His tone was low and cold, and he asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm talking to her. Didn't you see? I'm now the assistant of Coach Ling. She doesn't seem to be in good health and can't stand anyone's rude attitude." "Are you sure you were talking normally just now?" Li Nanheng looked at him coldly. If it weren't for the fact that this was Feng Ling's temporary home, this boy's hand that pinched her chin just now would have been crippled. "Assistant?" Chen Beiqing was so focused on Feng Ling that he didn't pay much attention to the introduction of the martial arts club boss just now. Now he noticed that there seemed to be something wrong. How could an assistant look more powerful than the boss? His expression did not change, but his eyes looked at Li Nanheng up and down. After thinking for a while, his eyes fell on Feng Ling again. Feng Ling sat there without moving. She really didn't have much strength right now. Although she felt that her fever should have subsided a lot after taking the antipyretic, perhaps the antipyretic had a little sleeping effect, so she had been a little sleepy. But now, her sleepiness was stimulated by this scene. She just sat there listlessly. She didn't have the energy to deal with the mess in front of her. She just didn't want to bother about it. She raised her hand and waved. "Okay, let's go to class." Chen Beiqing didn't speak but just looked at her. Obviously, he didn't intend to let it go. At this time, the boss suddenly said with a smile, "Well, it's indeed time for class. Classmate Chen, after all, there are still many students waiting. Let's talk about personal issues after class. Besides, this is the first time that Coach Li comes to work this afternoon. He will be one of your coaches in the future. Don't leave a bad impression on him. Go to class." At this time, Feng Ling abruptly turned to look at the man who was looking down at her. She wanted to roll her eyes, but seeing that there were too many people here, she held back and only said in a low voice, "Boss, the assistant position hasn't been decided yet. I'll tell you after class. You happen to be in poor health recently, and you don't have enough energy. Since Coach Li is such a good fighter and is willing to stay as your assistant, I can't let him stay as an assistant all the time. I just want him to be familiar with the environment, working methods, and curriculum of our martial arts club. I estimate that within 2 or 3 months, he will be able to teach these students alone and directly be promoted to a main class coach like you. I just want him to help me explain the affairs of our martial arts club to him. Don't think it's troublesome. Now we are in need of talents. I really don't want to turn away such a good fighter." These words seemed to be said with sincerity. The boss had clearly seen Li Nanheng barging in this morning. He clearly knew that there was a grudge between him and her, but he still went against his principles to arrange for him to be by her side. If Li Nanheng didn't take out some money to settle this matter, she would cut off her head and let him kick it like a ball. "I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant. Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1027. No matter how impatient Feng Ling was, the boss had already spoken. She then waved her hand. "All right, you guys go to class first. I'm going out. If there's anything, call me in the office." With that, he turned around and slipped away. Feng Ling suppressed her anger and didn't bother to look at the man next to her. She just glared at Chen Beiqing, who was standing there as if he wouldn't give up until he made things clear. "Hurry up and go to class." Seeing that she didn't seem to be in a good mood, Chen Beiqing endured it. Under the gaze of a group of students in the classroom, he pushed his cheeks with the tip of his tongue again, turned around, and walked into the line with a sullen face. He went to his usual seat in class. It wasn't until the group of students began to prepare themselves for class that the classroom returned to its usual quiet and orderly state. Fong Ling sat in her seat and turned to look at Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng also stood on the spot. He glanced sideways and lowered his head to look at her. His brows were slightly raised. Seeing his obviously proud expression, Fong Ling glared at him harshly and swallowed the words in her throat. In the end, she said with an ugly expression, "What are you looking at? Do you think it's so easy to be my assistant? Do you think you can get a free salary just by standing here staring at me?" The man smiled faintly. "So, what does Coach Ling need me to do now? From the standard basic movements these people are doing, you can tell what they are learning. Go and see for yourself. Whose posture is not standard and who's bad? Go and supervise them." "I'll sit here and rest," Fong Ling instructed coldly. Hearing her commanding tone, Li Nanheng frowned and chuckled. "All right." With that, the tall man walked into the classroom. Looking at the man's back, Fong Ling raised her head and rolled her eyes helplessly toward the ceiling. Then, a few minutes later, Fong Ling heard the screams of several students who didn't perform particularly well. Hearing those screams, she could imagine the scene. Ah, be gentle. Even if he is a coach, he is just an assistant to Coach Ling temporarily. Besides, you are a newcomer. Do you know how to teach? It hurts so much. Ah, hearing the continuous cries inside, Fong Ling closed her eyes. To be personally taught this set of movements by Li Nanheng, the students didn't know whether they were lucky or unlucky. After all, she had learned most of her skills at 11 base, and he had taught her a lot. One had to know that this newcomer was not an exaggeration to say that he was their founder. "Ah, my mother, my bones are going to break. Be gentle, help. Coach Ling, help, help." After half of the class, the students realized that Coach Ling's usual strictness and indifference were very gentle in front of this new assistant coach. This person was the real devil. When Fong Ling felt a little better, she got up and entered, only to see that the group of students were doing push-ups on the ground as if they were better off dead. They were doing the most basic balance training, which was the simplest single-body balance posture. Ordinary people would tremble all over if they couldn't even hold it for 30 seconds. Looking at the current state of the students, it had probably been more than 5 minutes. It was just like when Li Nanheng dragged her out to do devil training in the middle of the night. Especially Chen Beiqing, who had some doubts about Li Nanheng because Li Nanheng had dragged him away just now. It was not that women were very sensitive, but men were also particularly sensitive to certain things. For example, the indifference and hostility of this new assistant coach to him was very obvious. Obviously, it was cruel for everyone to just hold the ground with their bare hands for 5 minutes, and some people couldn't hold it anymore and had already fallen to the ground. And Chen Beiqing didn't just do the same. Li Nanheng stood half a meter away from him and kicked his leg. "Straighten. Lengthen. Your knee is bent. I told you to straighten, can't you understand? Don't shake your hand. You're a big man and you can't even hold the balance for 5 minutes? What kind of man are you?" Chen Beiqing gritted his teeth secretly. He was about to lose his temper, but when he turned his eyes, he suddenly saw Fong Ling standing at the door. He immediately maintained the same steady posture and didn't say anything, but the sweat on his forehead revealed what he had been through. "Li Nanheng, come out," Fong Ling said coldly. Li Nanheng looked back at her and said indifferently, "Coach Ling, what can I do for you? Or are you not satisfied with my way of education? No, come out. Let's talk." Fong Ling said and turned to walk to the bench outside the classroom. Li Nanheng didn't move. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of Chen Beiqing's movement. Seeing that Chen Beiqing's leg was about to relax, he suddenly raised his foot and kicked him hard in the leg. Chen Beiqing immediately staggered to the ground in pain and then suddenly raised his head and glared at him. Your movement is not standard. Do it again. Li Nanheng glanced at him coldly and turned to leave. The people around them didn't say much until the tall figure had left. Only then did they all turn around and look at student Shen, who seemed to be especially targeted, with sympathetic eyes. Cough. Well, Beiqing, are you okay? Chen Beiqing got up and looked down at his leg, which was almost broken by the kick just now. Because everyone else was still doing it, and there were surveillance cameras in the classroom, if he stood here for too long, Coach Ling might say something when she checked the surveillance cameras in the classroom, so he bent down and continued to do it. But when he bent down and put his hands on the ground, he looked out, only to see that Li Nanheng had gone out, and he couldn't help cursing. Damn, as if feeling the hostile gaze behind him, Li Nanheng didn't stop. When he walked out of the classroom, he suddenly looked back and met Chen Beiqing's unhappy gaze. The two men just looked at each other silently. Chen Beiqing didn't avoid his gaze, nor did he make any unnecessary movements. He just looked at him directly. Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and snorted coldly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He left. When he left the classroom, he saw Feng Ling standing a few meters away, waiting for him. It was just that he had a serious expression on his face, and it was obvious that he wasn't going to say anything nice. I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant. Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1028. Feng Ling looked up at him. Hearing that he came out, Feng Ling looked up at him. The man's eyes were so calm that it seemed that he was just working seriously and didn't have any other thoughts at all. She frowned and said, "What do you want?" "I said this place is not suitable for you, and I don't intend to take you in, so you put your hands on my boss, right? Li Nanheng, you don't lack money. What you lack is time. Do you have to waste your time on me?" "Coach Ling," Li Nanheng said indifferently, "isn't it time for class? Are you sure you want to discuss these irrelevant things with me at this time?" Feng Ling paused and then glared at him fiercely. "Don't call me Coach Ling. Then what should I call you?" Li Nanheng smiled faintly. His voice was low and slightly hoarse, but also seemed to be inexplicably bewitching. "Or should I call you boss instead?" Feng Ling. She looked at him as if he was crazy. "How do you feel? Do you have a headache?" Li Nanheng changed the topic at the right time when she was about to lose her temper. Feng Ling didn't look at his concerned eyes, turned her face away expressionlessly, took a step back, sat on the chair behind her, and said coldly, "It's just a cold. I won't die." "Then sit down and teach me today's class," the man said and turned to go back. "Wait a minute." Feng Ling abruptly stopped him. "I definitely won't let you stay. If you insist on teaching this class for me, then go ahead. Just treat it as you owe me. But let me warn you, they are all my students and have nothing to do with me. Don't vent your anger on anyone because of your personal anger." Li Nanheng seemed not to hear her. He slowed down for a moment when she spoke, but only for a moment. Then he walked in without looking back. Feng Ling sat outside and raised her hand to rub her aching head. The boss must be crazy. How could he really take him in? For this group of students, this lesson couldn't be described with just the word deep water. But since they all came to the martial arts club to learn, of course, they were interested in this aspect and must have seen all kinds of relevant learning materials and videos. The new assistant coach's skills were obviously not simple, but they didn't know who he was. Although everyone thought he was too strict and ruthless, he did teach very well and to a high standard. Coach Ling was already the best fighter in the entire martial arts club and the best teacher. But the arrival of this new assistant manager, only then did they realize that there were still people who could be colder, stricter, and more terrifying than Coach Ling. They were also faster, better, and more powerless to resist. It was precisely because of Li Nanheng's ruthlessness that these students still secretly asked for Li Nanheng's phone number, hoping to build a good relationship with this new coach so that they wouldn't be targeted like Chen Beiqing in class in the future. TSK, speaking of student Chen, what he experienced tonight was simply inhuman torture. He was forced to do balance support training for half an hour, plus other difficult movements, each of which was like picking his bones, but he couldn't refuse and had to listen to Coach Li's instructions. When the class was finally over, he didn't even have the strength to call out Coach Ling's name, let alone think about Coach Ling. He lay on the ground dejectedly, too lazy to move. In the end, he was kicked by Coach Li, who warned him that lying on the ground was too easy and twisted his waist. After intensive training, lying on the ground like this would only distort his tight muscles and joints. He told him to get up and leave immediately, or stand up and lean against the wall. Chen Beiqing's anger and temper were all gone now. He didn't want to say a word. Today was also the first time that she was not invited to dinner after Chen Beiqing's class. Although she refused him every time, he was used to sending flowers before coming and asking if she wanted to have dinner with him before leaving. Even if he was refused, it had become a habit of his. But today, the office door that was supposed to be knocked on was pushed open by another man. It was not Chen Beiqing, but Li Nanheng, who had changed back to his black casual sportswear. "Boss Feng, come home from work. Shall I send you back?" Li Nanheng stood in front of the door, looking as if he was working hard. He looked like a proper person, and it really seemed like that was the case. The corner of Feng Ling's mouth twitched because he called her Boss Feng. She really didn't want to talk to him, but this man was so determined in her life that she really couldn't imagine what he wanted to do next. "If you want to go back by yourself. I'll take a taxi back." Feng Ling lowered her head to sort out the lesson plans and videos on her desk, saying, "Also, please move away from my room next door." In just a few days after finding her, this man had occupied almost all of her living space. She was really caught off guard. She didn't know how to deal with it. "You know I live next door. It's convenient for you to drive or take a taxi." "Why do you take a taxi?" "I still have things to do." Feng Ling didn't look at him. Li Nanheng took out a cigarette from his trouser pocket and said indifferently, "Go ahead. I'll send you back when you're done." With that, he went out to light a cigarette. Feng Ling sat in the office and the man smoked near the bathroom outside. About 10 minutes later, the man came back, but Feng Ling was still sitting behind the desk. He took a chair and sat down without speaking. She didn't speak either. As time passed, everyone else had left, and only the two of them were left in the martial arts club. Seeing that he really didn't leave, Feng Ling looked up at him, but at the moment she raised her eyes, they suddenly met the man's eyes. He had been looking at her. At the moment when their eyes met, many images of the past suddenly appeared in Feng Ling's mind. Who would have thought that the person in charge of 11 Base would condescend to live in a cheap rental house in a place like Boston and come to such a small martial arts club to beg to be her assistant? Even when she said she was busy, he would sit there quietly and obediently and patiently wait for her to finish her work without saying a word, like a child who had done something wrong and was trying to make up for it and waiting for the adults to forgive him. "I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant that you're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.